The summer heat shimmered across the Montana Territory, distorting the distant mountains into wavering blue shadows. Tom Halbrook squinted against the harsh sunlight, his weathered face creased with concentration. At 52, his once dark hair had faded to steel gray, but his eyes remained sharp as they tracked the dust cloud moving along the ridge. "I know you're there, Jake," he muttered, adjusting his position behind the boulder. Sweat trickled down his spine as he checked his Colt revolver one last time. 6 bullets. He would need only one if his aim held true. The U.S. Marshal badge that had adorned his chest for 20 years was now tucked away in a cedar box back at his ranch, but the responsibility it represented still weighed on him. The dust cloud stopped. A figure on horseback appeared silhouetted against the Montana sky. Jake Wilcox. Murderer. Thief. The last name on Tom's list before retirement. Tom had been tracking him for 3 weeks across the Montana Territory, following a trail of blood and broken promises. 3 homesteaders dead. A young deputy marshal wounded. This ended today. "Come on down, Jake," Tom called out, his voice carrying across the valley. "There's nowhere left to run." A shot cracked in response, the bullet splintering rock inches from Tom's head. He didn't flinch. "You're wasting bullets, son." Another shot. Closer this time. Tom waited patient as the mountains themselves. 20 years as a marshal had taught him that patience often meant the difference between living and dying. Jake's voice drifted down, taunting. "You're a long way from home, old man. No badge to hide behind out here." "Never needed the badge, Jake, just needed the law." Tom shifted position, grimacing at the stiffness in his joints. The war wounds from nearly 15 years ago still troubled him on cold mornings and hot afternoons. Gettysburg had left more than just physical scars. Jake's horse moved closer, picking its way down the rocky slope. Tom could make out the man's features now. Young, maybe 30, with the hard eyes of someone who'd seen too much and cared too little. The kind of eyes Tom had seen too often since the war ended. "Last chance to walk away, Marshal," Jake called out. "I hear they don't pay retirement for dead lawmen." Tom didn't respond. Instead, he waited until Jake reached the bottom of the slope, until the man's confidence grew with each step his horse took. "Just you and me now," Jake continued, drawing closer. "No witnesses. No law out here but what we make." When Jake was 30 yards away, Tom stood. The movement startled Jake, who reached for his gun with the quick reflexes of youth. But Tom was already firing. The shot echoed across the valley, causing birds to scatter from nearby trees. Jake's expression shifted from confidence to surprise as he toppled from his horse, clutching his chest. Tom approached cautiously, his gun still trained on the fallen outlaw. "How'd you—" Jake gasped, blood staining his shirt. "I never saw. Some things you learn can't be outrun," Tom said quietly, kneeling beside the dying man. "The war taught me that much." "The war," Jake coughed, his eyes growing distant. "Always comes back to the war, don't it?" Tom didn't answer. He'd heard similar words from other dying men. Some he'd fought alongside, others he'd brought to justice. The war had changed everything, redrawing not just maps, but the boundaries of men's souls. As Jake's breathing slowed, Tom noticed the Confederate cavalry insignia tattooed on the man's wrist. Another ghost from a conflict that refused to die. "Got anyone I should write to?" Tom asked, his voice softening slightly. Jake's laugh turned into a gurgle. "No one left who'd care to read it." Those were his last words. Tom remained kneeling for a moment, then reached over and closed Jake's eyes. He was securing the body over Jake's horse when he felt the sharp pain in his side. Looking down, he noticed blood seeping through his shirt. Jake's bullet had found its mark, after all catching him just below the ribs. "Damn," he muttered, pressing his bandana against the wound. Not fatal if he could get back to town. But town was 2 days' ride, and blood loss was already making him lightheaded. As he mounted his horse, the pain intensifying with each movement, Tom had the unsettling thought that Jake might have the last laugh after all. "One last ride, old girl," he whispered to his mare, patting her neck. "Get me home." 6 months later, Tom sat on the porch of his ranch house, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and crimson. The bullet wound had healed, leaving yet another scar to join the collection his body had accumulated over the decades. The Holbrook Ranch sat on 100 acres of Montana territory, nestled in a valley that caught the first light of dawn and the last glow of dusk. Tom had purchased it 5 years earlier after burying his wife Sarah and their daughter Emma. The fever had taken them both within a week of each other, leaving Tom with nothing but a badge memories and a future he hadn't planned for. The ranch became his sanctuary, a place far from the violent realities of his profession. Now, in retirement, it was his world. He reached for the worn Bible on the small table beside his chair, running his fingers over the cracked leather cover. It had belonged to his father, a circuit judge, who had taught Tom that justice without mercy was just another form of tyranny. Beside the Bible lay his father's copy of federal law, equally worn, equally revered. "What would you make of this world now, Pa?" Tom murmured, opening the Bible to a page marked with a faded ribbon. His father had died before the war, believing the Union would hold. He never saw how close it came to shattering completely. The distant sound of a horse's whinny drew Tom's attention to his small herd grazing in the pasture below. 20 head of cattle, 2 horses, and enough work to keep a man busy from sunup to sundown. Enough work to keep the memories at bay most days. Tom stood wincing slightly as his side protested the movement. At 52, he felt the weight of every mile ridden, every fight, fought every night spent under stars instead of a roof. The face that looked back at him from his shaving mirror each morning belonged to a stranger, lined, weathered with eyes that had seen too much. His only regular contact with the outside world came through Joseph Miller, who delivered mail and supplies from Redemption Creek once a week. Joseph was one of the few people Tom genuinely welcomed. A former slave who had fought for the Union and now built his own life in the changing West. The town of Redemption Creek itself remained largely foreign territory to Tom, despite being just 10 miles away. After the war, many Confederate veterans had settled there, bringing Southern ways and Southern grudges to Montana territory. As a former Union soldier and federal marshal, Tom was viewed with suspicion at best, hostility at worst. That suited him fine. The less he dealt with people, the less chance of trouble finding him. Tom walked to the edge of his porch, surveying his land, as the last light faded. The wound in his side might have healed, but he knew something had changed during that final confrontation with Jake Wilcox. For the first time, Tom had felt his own mortality closing in, not just as a concept, but as a physical presence. "Getting old Holbrook," he muttered to himself, rubbing his side absently. He was about to turn in when he noticed movement at the edge of his property, where his land bordered the forest. Habit made him reach for the rifle he kept by the door. Through the gathering dusk, he could make out a figure staggering along the fence line. Too small for a man moving too erratically for a deer. As he watched, the figure collapsed beneath an old oak tree. Tom hesitated only briefly before grabbing his rifle and medical kit. 20 years of upholding the law had ingrained certain responses too deeply to ignore. By the time he reached the oak tree, the sun had disappeared completely, leaving only a faint glow on the horizon. Tom approached cautiously, rifle-ready ears, straining for any sound of ambush. What he found instead was a young woman barely more than a girl, lying crumpled beneath the tree. Her dress, once perhaps blue or green, was torn and stained with dirt, and what looked disturbingly like blood. Her dark hair was matted, her feet bare and bleeding. "Ma'am," Tom called softly, keeping a careful distance. "Can you hear me?" The young woman stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open. They were a startling blue, bright with fear and pain. "Help!" she whispered, her voice so faint Tom had to lean closer to hear. "Please, I'm Tom Helbrook. This is my land you're on. Are you hurt? Who did this to you?" She tried to sit up, then fell back with a whimper of pain. He'll find me. Who will? Earl." She managed, her voice breaking on the name. "Earl Whitmore." Tom's body tensed involuntarily. Colonel Ezekiel Earl Whitmore was the largest landowner in the county, a former Confederate officer who had built a small empire in the decades since the war. His ranch Whitmore Estate employed half the men in Redemption Creek and was said to be the most profitable in the territory. He was also rumored to be eyeing the territorial governor's seat in the next election. "You're Colonel Whitmore's—" Tom left the question unfinished. "Wife?" She said the word sounding like a curse. "He calls me wife." She began to cough, her thin body shaking with the effort. When she pulled her hand away from her mouth, Tom saw fresh blood staining her palm. "He'll kill you," she whispered, her blue eyes locking onto his with sudden intensity. "He's killed others. He'll kill you, just like that." Decision time. Tom had spent 20 years upholding the law, but he knew how the law worked in places like Redemption Creek. A man like Whitmore made his own law enforced by money and influence. If this girl was indeed Whitmore's wife, helping her meant making an enemy of the most powerful man in the county. But looking at her battered body and terrified eyes, Tom knew he couldn't turn away. "Can you stand?" he asked, setting his rifle down and reaching for her. She tried collapsing against him as her legs gave way. Tom caught her easily. She weighed hardly anything, all skin and bones beneath the torn dress. "I've got you," he said, lifting her into his arms. "What's your name?" "Clara," she whispered against his shoulder. "Clara Wilson, not Whitmore. Never Whitmore." As Tom carried her back toward his ranch house, he couldn't shake the feeling that his peaceful retirement had just come to an abrupt end. The sun had set completely now, leaving only starlight to guide their way. In the distance, Tom thought he could see smoke rising from the direction of Whitmore Estate. They would be looking for her already. The girl, Clara, drifted in and out of consciousness as Tom tended to her wounds. There were more of them than he'd initially realized, bruises in various stages of healing across her ribs and back, a deep cut above her right eye, finger marks around her throat. Tom had seen similar injuries during the war on prisoners rescued from Confederate camps. He'd also seen them on women in frontier towns where law was thin and brutality thick. The sight kindled an old anger he thought he'd left behind with his badge. He worked methodically, cleaning and bandaging what he could, his touch gentle despite his weathered hands. Clara flinched occasionally but didn't resist his care. "How old are you, Clara?" he asked as he applied a cool cloth to her forehead. 19, she murmured, eyes still closed. "I think. I'm not sure anymore." "And how long have you been with Colonel Whitmore?" Her eyes opened, then haunted and hollow. 2 years. My father owed him money, so he took me instead. and Tom's jaw tightened. "That's not legal." A bitter smile touched her cracked lips. "Tell that to the judge. Tell that to the sheriff. They all eat at his table, drink his whiskey." She wasn't wrong. Tom had observed enough during his infrequent trips to town to know that Whitmore had most local officials in his pocket. "Do you have family looking for you?" he asked. Clara shook her head slightly. "My father died last winter. Consumption. Mother's been gone longer. No siblings." Her voice grew fainter. "Nobody looking." Tom finished bandaging a particularly nasty cut on her arm, then pulled a chair beside the bed. "Rest now. You're safe here." "No," she whispered, her hand suddenly gripping his wrist with surprising strength. "Not safe. He'll come. He always comes." "I was a U.S. Marshal for 20 years, Tom said quietly. "Before that, I fought at Gettysburg, Antietam, and Cold Harbor. I can handle one plantation owner with delusions of grandeur." Clara's grip didn't loosen. "You don't understand. He's not just... He has men, loyal men, and he's killed before." Her voice dropped even lower. "I've seen it." "Who?" Tom asked, leaning closer. "Who has he killed?" "Moses," she said, her eyes distant with memory. "He worked in the stables. He was kind to me, gave me extra food when Earl had me locked in my room. Earl caught him, beat him to death right there in the yard, made the other workers watch." Tom felt cold despite the warm evening. "When was this?" 3 months ago, but there were others before." Her eyes focused on Tom again, desperate. "Earl's building something bigger than a ranch. He talks about power, about taking back what the North stole. He has meetings with men from other territories, men with money and guns." She began coughing again, and Tom helped her drink some water. "Why run now?" he asked when she'd recovered. "After 2 years," Clara's expression hardened. "I found papers in his study, lists of names, payments to officials, and a letter about getting into Congress, about restoring the natural order." She swallowed hard. "And I couldn't take it anymore. The things he does, the things he makes me do." She turned her face away, but not before Tom saw the shame that flushed her pale cheeks. "You don't have to explain," he said gently. "Get some rest. We'll figure this out in the morning." But as Clara drifted into an uneasy sleep, Tom sat by the window rifle across his lap, watching the night. Her words echoed in his mind, particularly the references to Congress and restoring the natural order. He'd heard similar sentiments during Reconstruction from those who believed the South would rise again. Most were just bitter words from defeated men, but occasionally there were those with the resources and determination to act on such beliefs. Men like Earl Whitmore. Tom's thoughts were interrupted by a distant glow on the horizon. Not the dawn, which was still hours away, but the orange flicker of torches, moving in his direction. "Damn," he muttered, rising stiffly. They'd found her trail faster than he'd expected. Tom moved to a trunk in the corner of the room, unlocking it with a key he kept around his neck. Inside lay his past, the U.S. Marshal badge gleaming in the lamplight, official papers of appointment and commendation, a uniform he hadn't worn in 15 years, and a Winchester rifle newer and more powerful than the everyday one he used for hunting. His hand hovered over the badge for a moment before moving to the Winchester. The badge no longer held any official power but the rifle that spoke a language all men understood. As he loaded the weapon, Tom thought of his wife Sarah and what she would say about this situation. Sarah had been his moral compass, his reminder that the law existed to protect people, not just punish them. Before she died, she'd made him promise one thing: live a life that means something, Tom. For 5 years, he'd interpreted that as quiet retirement, harming no one, helping no one. Now, watching the torches draw closer, he wondered if he'd misunderstood her all along. Tom checked on Clara one last time. She was sleeping fitfully, her bruised face troubled even in unconsciousness. Just a girl, really. 19, the same age his daughter Emma would have been. That thought settled something in him. Tom straightened his shoulders, feeling the familiar weight of decision. He might not wear the badge anymore, but some principles didn't require official sanction. "All right, Colonel Whitmore," he murmured, moving toward the door. "Let's see what kind of man you really are." The torches were closer now, maybe 15 minutes away. Tom estimated at least 6 riders, probably armed, coming onto his property, hunting a battered young woman who had fled from abuse, and possibly worse. Tom stood on his porch, Winchester in hand, and waited for them to arrive. Behind him, in the safety of his home, Clara Wilson slept. Injured, afraid, but for the moment, protected. Whatever came next, Tom knew one thing with certainty: his quiet retirement had just become a great deal louder. The riders approached Tom's ranch like a funeral procession, torches casting long shadows across the moonlit pasture. 6 men, just as Tom had estimated. Leading them was a figure who sat straighter in the saddle than the others, Colonel Ezekiel Earl Whitmore himself. Even at a distance, Whitmore cut an imposing figure. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a full beard going silver at the edges, he looked every inch the Confederate officer he had once been. His black coat and hat stood out against the torchlit darkness, a deliberate statement of authority. Tom stood motionless on his porch, Winchester held casually but visibly in his arms. He'd faced down worse odds during his years as a marshal, though admittedly with a badge backing him up. Now he was just one man defending his property against the most powerful landowner in the county. The riders halted at the edge of his yard. Earl Whitmore raised a gloved hand, silencing a murmur from one of his men. "Thomas Halbrook," Whitmore called his voice, carrying the cultured accent of Virginia aristocracy, despite over a decade in Montana territory. "It's been some time." "Not long enough, Colonel," Tom replied evenly. "You're trespassing on private property." A chuckle rippled through Whitmore's men, but the colonel himself didn't smile. "I believe you have something that belongs to me, Marshal. Or should I say, former Marshal?" "Nothing here belongs to you, Whitmore." "My wife," Whitmore said, his voice hardening. "My wife ran off this afternoon. Her tracks lead to your ranch." Tom's grip tightened on the Winchester, but his expression remained impassive. "No wife of yours here, Colonel. Just me and the livestock." Whitmore's eyes narrowed, visible even in the torchlight. "Are you calling me a liar, Halbrook?" "I'm telling you, no wife of yours is on my property. That's fact, not accusation." For a moment silence hung in the air, broken only by the snorting of horses and the crackle of torches. Then Whitmore smiled, a cold expression that never reached his eyes. "Perhaps we're having a failure of communication," he said smoothly. "Clara, my wife, has been unwell, mentally unbalanced. The doctor in Helena confirmed it last month. She requires supervision medication. In her confused state, she may have told you otherwise." Tom had encountered this tactic before: wealthy men dismissing inconvenient women as hysterical or unbalanced. It was a convenient way to silence them. "Funny thing about being a marshal for 20 years, Tom said. "You get pretty good at spotting lies, even well-dressed ones." Whitmore's smile vanished. "I want my wife Halbrook. Now. And I told you she's not here." Before Whitmore could respond, the door behind Tom creaked open. He turned dismayed to see Clara standing in the doorway, one hand braced against the frame for support. Despite her injuries, she'd managed to put on a clean dress Tom had found, one that had belonged to his wife, now hanging loosely on Clara's thin frame. "I'm not your wife, Earl," she said, her voice stronger than Tom would have believed possible. "I never was. No minister, no contract, no consent. Just a scared girl and a piece of paper my father signed when he was drunk and desperate." Whitmore's face darkened. "Get in the wagon, Clara, now." "No." She took a step forward, standing beside Tom now. "I'm not your property." One of Whitmore's men laughed. "Colonel, seems like your woman's found some backbone." "Shut up, Davis," Whitmore snapped, then turned his attention back to Clara. "You ungrateful little—" He stopped himself, visibly regaining control. "Clara, darling, you're confused. Whatever lies you've told this man, whatever delusions you're suffering, we can sort them out at home, where you belong." "I saw the papers, Earl," Clara said quietly. "The letters, the plans. I know what you're doing." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Whitmore's face. "You've been in my study. I've been everywhere, listening, watching. I know about the meetings with Senator Hampton. I know about the money from Richmond. I know about Moses." The name hung in the air like a gunshot. Tom watched Whitmore's expression shift from uncertainty to cold rage. "You're embarrassing yourself, girl," Whitmore said, his voice low and dangerous. "And trying my patience." Chowtour Tom stepped slightly in front of Clara. "She stays here, Whitmore. If you have a legal claim, take it to the territorial court in Helena. Until then, get off my land." Whitmore's hand moved to his coat, and for a moment, Tom thought he might draw a weapon. Instead, he extracted a silver flask, took a deliberate sip, and replaced it. "You're making a grave mistake, Halbrook," he said. "This is Redemption Creek, not Washington. Your federal badge means nothing here. Your Union victory means nothing here." His gaze shifted to Clara. "And this is still my territory." "This is federal land," Tom countered. "My deed comes from the United States government, not your personal kingdom. The law applies here, Whitmore. Even to you." Earl's jaw tightened visibly. "The law," he repeated with contempt. "Let me educate you about the law in Redemption Creek, Halbrook. Judge Harper answers to me. Sheriff Collins answers to me. Every business, every acre of grazing land, every water right for 50 miles, all mine." He leaned forward in his saddle. "Your isolated little ranch exists because I allow it to exist. Because until now, you've kept to yourself and stayed out of my way. That arrangement has just ended." Tom raised the Winchester slightly. "I'd reconsider those threats, Colonel. I may be retired, but I haven't forgotten how to use this." For a tense moment, Tom thought Whitmore might order his men to attack. Instead, the colonel straightened in his saddle, his expression cooling into something more calculated. "Clara," he said, addressing her directly. "Last chance. Come home now and I'll forget this lapse in judgment. Stay and you'll have nothing. No protection, no future. And neither will anyone who helps you." His gaze flicked meaningfully to Tom. Clara stepped fully onto the porch beside Tom. In the torchlight, her bruises stood out starkly against her pale skin, but her back was straight, her chin lifted. "I'd rather have nothing than another day with you," she said clearly. Whitmore's expression hardened to granite. He stared at Clara for a long moment, then shifted his gaze to Tom. "This is war, Halbrook," he said quietly. "War you can't win." Without waiting for a response, he wheeled his horse around and rode away, his men following close behind. The torches receded into the darkness, leaving Tom and Clara standing in the silvery moonlight. "You shouldn't have shown yourself," Tom said, his eyes still tracking the departing riders. "He might have believed me." "No," Clara replied, her voice tired but certain. He wouldn't have. Earl never believes anything he doesn't want to believe." She swayed slightly, and Tom caught her elbow to steady her. "You need to rest. We can figure out our next steps in the morning." Clara nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on the distant torches. "He meant what he said, Mr. Helbrook. About war. Earl doesn't make empty threats." "Neither do I," Tom replied, guiding her back inside. "And I've had more practice at winning them." Dawn broke clear and cool over the Montana mountains, painting the valley in soft gold. Tom had slept little, keeping watch through the night for any sign of Whitmore's return. None had come, but he knew better than to assume the danger had passed. Clara emerged from the bedroom looking marginally better than the night before. The sleep had brought some color back to her cheeks, though the bruises remained stark against her skin. "You look like you could use some coffee," Tom observed, pouring her a cup from the pot on the stove. "Thank you," she said, accepting it with both hands. "For everything." Tom nodded, uncomfortable with gratitude. "How are you feeling?" "Sore, scared." She took a sip of coffee. "But alive. That's something." "It's everything," Tom corrected quietly. He sat across from her at the small kitchen table. "We need to talk about what happens next. Whitmore won't give up easily." Clara's hands tightened around her cup. "I know. You mentioned papers. Evidence of something illegal." She nodded slowly. "Earl's been building connections across the territory. Money changing hands, promises of positions once he reaches office. He wants to run for territorial governor next year, but that's just the beginning." "The beginning of what?" Clara's eyes met his, troubled and sincere. "Something he calls the restoration. I've heard him use that word with the men who visit from back east. Men with money and influence. They talk about taking back what was lost in the war." Tom's expression darkened. He'd heard rumors of such sentiments, die-hard Confederates who refused to accept defeat, who dreamed of regaining their former power. Most were just bitter talk from men who couldn't adjust to the new reality. But occasionally there were those with the resources to act on such dreams. "Any names you recognized?" he asked. "Senator Hampton from Virginia, a judge named Thornton, others I didn't know." She hesitated. "They meet in the East Wing, where Earl keeps his study. The documents are in a safe behind his portrait." Tom nodded, considering. "And the man you mentioned, Moses. You said Earl killed him." Clara's expression crumpled slightly. "Moses helped me when Earl had me locked in my room for 3 days without food. Just water and some bread. Earl found out." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "He beat him to death in the stable yard. Made everyone watch." "Were there witnesses besides Whitmore's people?" "Everyone who works at the estate saw it. But they're all afraid. Earl owns them one way or another." Tom rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. He'd investigated enough murders to know how difficult they were to prove, without cooperative witnesses or physical evidence. "What about the local law?" "The sheriff," Clara's laugh was bitter. "Sheriff Collins, he has dinner at the estate every Sunday. His daughter is married to Earl's foreman." It was the answer Tom expected, but it still troubled him. Law that served only the powerful wasn't law at all, just another form of tyranny. "We need to get a message to the federal marshal's office in Helena," he said finally. "I still have contacts there. If Whitmore is involved in corruption that crosses territorial lines, They'll have jurisdiction. How long would that take? Days, maybe a week. Depends on whether William Cooper is still the chief marshal there. He'd come himself if he knew I was asking. Clara stared into her coffee. We don't have a week. Earl won't wait that long. She was right, and Tom knew it. Whitmore had been publicly challenged and rejected. Men like him couldn't tolerate such defiance. I'll need to go into town, Tom decided. Send a telegram to Helena. Town? Clara looked alarmed. But Redemption Creek is too dangerous, Tom finished for her. I know, I'll ride to Elk Fork instead. It's smaller, about 20 miles east, less likely to be under Whitmore's thumb. And leave me here alone. Her voice caught slightly. Tom studied her. Despite her fear, there was a resilience in Clara that reminded him of his late wife, a quiet strength beneath the vulnerability. No, he said finally. You'll come with me. It's not safe here anymore. Relief flashed across her face. When do we leave? As soon as you're strong enough to ride. Tomorrow morning, if your injuries permit. He stood moving to the window to scan the surrounding landscape. Today, I'm going to teach you how to shoot. The sound of gunfire echoed across the valley as Tom stood behind Clara, adjusting her grip on his spare revolver. Steady, he instructed. Breathe out as you squeeze the trigger, not before or after. Clara narrowed her eyes at the line of bottles Tom had set up on the fence 30 feet away. Her first attempts had gone wide, but she was a quick learner. She fired again. This time the center bottle exploded in a satisfying shower of glass. Good, Tom nodded. Again. Clara fired 4 more shots in succession, hitting 3 bottles and missing 1. Not bad for a beginner, Tom said, genuinely impressed. You've got a steady hand. My father taught me a little before. She trailed off, handing the revolver back to Tom. Before things got bad. Tom reloaded the weapon, then offered it back to her. Keep it. There's a holster in the house that might work for you. Belonged to my wife. Clara accepted the gun with solemn respect. Sarah, right? You mentioned her name in your sleep last night. Tom stiffened slightly. He rarely spoke of Sarah or Emma to anyone. Their memory was private sacred. Yes, he said simply. Sarah. Clara seemed to sense his reticence. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to pry. It's all right. It's been 6 years. Tom turned back toward the targets, avoiding her gaze. She was a good woman, stronger than me in many ways. What happened to her? Fever. Took her and our daughter, Emma, within a week of each other. The words still hurt to say aloud, even after all this time. Emma was just 13. Clara was quiet for a moment. That's why you live out here alone. It wasn't a question, but Tom nodded anyway. Seemed easier than being around people. Fewer reminders. Does it work? Being alone? Tom considered the question honestly. No, he admitted. But it hurts less than the alternative. The conversation was interrupted by the distant sound of hoofbeats. Tom tensed, raising his rifle, but relaxed when he recognized the familiar figure approaching. Joseph, he said, lowering the weapon. Weekly mail delivery. Joseph Miller rode up to them on a sturdy bay horse mailbag slung across his shoulder. In his early 50s, Joseph had the weathered look of a man who had seen his share of hardship but refused to be broken by it. The scars on his wrists, remnants of slave shackles, were visible as he dismounted. Tom? He greeted with a nod, then turned curious eyes to Clara. Ma'am? Joseph, this is Clara Wilson, Tom said. Clara Joseph Miller. He brings mail from town once a week. Miss Wilson, Joseph said respectfully, though his eyes noted her bruises with concern. "Mr. Miller," Clara replied unconsciously, touching her face. Joseph turned back to Tom, his expression grave. "Trouble in town, Tom. Thought you should know." "What kind of trouble?" "Colonel Whitmore's been telling folks his wife's been kidnapped, offering a reward for information." Joseph's gaze flicked meaningfully to Clara. $500. Tom whistled softly. $500 was a fortune in these parts, more than most ranch hands made in a year. "That's not all," Joseph continued. "He's brought in outside men, guns for hire." "How many?" "4 that I saw. Mean-looking types. One of them I recognized, Wade Dawson." Tom's jaw tightened. Wade Dawson was a former U.S. Marshal who'd been discharged for excessive violence and corruption. Tom had testified at his dismissal hearing 8 years earlier. "Dawson's still holding that grudge, I take it?" Tom asked. Joseph nodded. "Heard him in the saloon telling anyone who'd listen how he was going to bring you in. Dead or alive, with emphasis on the former." Clara had gone pale. "This is my fault. I've brought this down on you." "No," Tom said firmly. "Whitmore made his choice when he decided the law didn't apply to him." He turned back to Joseph. "Anything else I should know?" Joseph hesitated, glancing at Clara. "Maybe we should speak privately." "Anything you have to say can be said in front of her," Tom insisted. Joseph sighed. "All right. Word is, Whitmore's been spreading stories about you, Tom, saying you fought dirty in the war, executed prisoners, that kind of talk." Old pain flashed through Tom's chest. There were memories from the war he'd spent decades trying to forget, decisions made in the chaos of battle that haunted his quietest moments. "What else?" Tom asked, his voice tight. "He's saying you always had it in for him because he fought for the Confederacy. That you're trying to ruin him because of the war." Tom shook his head in disgust. "The war's been over for 13 years. Only ones who can't let it go are men like Whitmore who can't accept they lost." "You know that, and I know that," Joseph said. "But folks around here, some of them still carry those wounds pretty deep." And Tom understood all too well. Montana Territory, like much of the West, had become a haven for those looking to escape the aftermath of the war. Confederate and Union veterans alike had moved west, seeking new beginnings, but old prejudices didn't disappear simply by crossing state lines. "Is there anyone in town we can trust?" Clara asked suddenly. Joseph considered. "Doc Morgan in Elk Fork. Rebecca Morgan. She treated my boy last winter when no one else would. Good woman. Widowed during the war. Union sympathizer." Tom nodded. "Rebecca. I remember her. Her husband was a surgeon with the 20th Maine. That's right. She works as the town doctor now. Lives above her practice on Main Street." "Good to know," Tom said. "We're heading to Elk Fork tomorrow. Need to send a telegram to the marshal's office in Helena." Joseph's expression grew troubled. "Might be too late for telegrams, Tom. Whitmore's offering a lot of money, and there are plenty of desperate men around these parts." As if to punctuate his words, a distant rifle shot cracked through the air. The bullet kicked up dirt near Joseph's horse, causing the animal to rear in panic. "Get down!" Tom shouted, pushing Clara toward the cover of the water trough while drawing his Winchester in the same motion. Another shot splintered wood from the porch railing. Tom spotted movement in the tree line about 200 yards away. At least 2 shooters, maybe more. "Joseph, get to the barn," Tom called, firing a covering shot toward the trees. Joseph sprinted across the yard, diving through the barn door, as bullets kicked up dust at his heels. Clara pressed herself against the water trough, the revolver Tom had given her clutched in trembling hands. "Stay down," Tom instructed, positioning himself to shield her while scanning for targets. They're trying to pin us down." "Who are they?" Clara gasped. "Bounty hunters, probably, hoping to collect Whitmore's reward." Tom fired again, causing a figure in the trees to duck for cover. Or maybe just Whitmore's men, looking to finish what they started. Tom's experienced eye counted at least 3 shooters moving through the trees trying to encircle the house. They were being cautious, maintaining distance, using the terrain for cover. Professional. "We need to get to the house," Tom said, calculating the distance about 40 yards of open ground. Too far to cross safely under fire. A bullet struck the water trough inches from Clara's head, sending splinters flying. She flinched, but didn't cry out. "When I start firing, run for the porch," Tom told her. "Don't stop. Don't look back. Just run." Clara nodded, gathering herself. "What about you? I'll be right behind you." Tom took a deep breath, then rose and fired rapidly toward the tree line, emptying the Winchester in a thunderous barrage that forced the shooters to take cover. "Now!" he shouted. Clara sprinted toward the house, her dress billowing behind her. Tom followed, reloading, as he ran, keenly aware of their vulnerability in the open yard. A shot rang out from a new direction, the ridge to the east. Tom felt something punch through his left shoulder, spinning him half around. The impact drove him to one knee, but he kept moving, gritting his teeth against the pain. Clara reached the porch and turned back, her eyes widening as she saw Tom stumble. Without hesitation, she raised the revolver he'd given her and fired toward the ridge. Her shots wild but effective in forcing the shooter to duck. That momentary distraction was enough for Tom to regain his feet and lunge the remaining distance to the porch. Clara grabbed his uninjured arm, helping him through the door. They slammed it shut behind them, Clara immediately sliding the heavy oak bar into place. "You're hit," she said, her voice tight with concern, as she noted the blood spreading across Tom's shirt. "Through and through," Tom grunted, moving to a window to check the shooters' positions. "Had worse." More bullets struck the exterior of the house, but the thick log walls provided good protection. Tom had built the place with defense in mind, a habit from years of making enemies as a marshal. "What do we do?" Clara asked, peering cautiously through another window. "Wait them out," Tom replied, grimacing as he shrugged off his shirt to examine the wound. "They'll either get bold and try to rush us, or they'll pull back at nightfall. And if they rush us," Tom nodded toward a shotgun mounted above the fireplace, "then we make them regret it." Clara's face was pale but determined as she retrieved the shotgun. "I've never fired one of these." "Point and pull," Tom said grimly, tearing a strip from his shirt to bind his shoulder. "Can't miss at close range." Outside, the firing had become more sporadic. Tom could see the shooters repositioning, working their way closer by using the outbuildings and terrain for cover. "They're good," he muttered. "Too good for random bounty hunters." A voice called out from the direction of the barn. "Halbrook, send out the girl, and you might live through this." Tom recognized the voice with a jolt of memory. "Wade Dawson," he said quietly. "Should have known Whitmore would send him." "Who is he?" Clara whispered. "Former marshal. Lost his badge for taking bribes and beating a prisoner to death." Tom's expression hardened. "We have history." "Tom Halbrook," Wade called again. "Your old badge won't help you now. You're harboring a fugitive wife from her lawful husband. That's a crime in this territory." Tom moved to a different window, trying to spot Wade's position. "She's not his wife, Wade, and you know it." A laugh floated across the yard. "What I know is Colonel Whitmore's offering $500 for her safe return, and another $500 for the men who interfered." There was a pause. That's a lot of money for an old lawman with blood on his hands. Tom's jaw tightened at the reference to his past. Wade was trying to rattle him using old wounds as weapons. "Why don't you come out and get us, Wade?" Tom called back. "Or are you still hiding behind hired guns?" A bullet splintered the window frame inches from Tom's head, answering his taunt. From the barn came the sound of struggle, then Joseph's voice crying out in pain. Tom's heart sank. He'd forgotten about Joseph in the chaos. "Got your mail carrier here, Halbrook," Wade shouted. "Seems he knows you pretty well. Says you freed him during the war. Isn't that touching?" Tom cursed under his breath. Joseph had been one of hundreds of slaves Tom's unit had liberated from a plantation in Georgia. They'd crossed paths again years later in Montana, forging a quiet friendship based on mutual respect. "Let him go, Wade," Tom called. "He's got nothing to do with this." "Oh, but he does now," Wade replied, his voice coldly amused. "See, I need someone to deliver a message, someone who can ride fast." There was a grunt of pain, then the sound of a horse galloping away. "Just sent your friend to bring back the sheriff," Wade called. "Figure we've got about 3 hours before he returns with reinforcements. So here's my offer, send out the girl now and you can ride away. Keep your life if not your reputation." Tom exchanged a glance with Clara, who shook her head firmly. "Not happening, Wade," Tom shouted back. "You want either of us, you'll have to come and get us." Wade's response was immediate and chilling. "Have it your way, Halbrook. But when this is over, I'm going to make sure everyone knows how the great Marshal Halbrook died hiding behind a woman's skirts, just like he hid behind his badge all those years." The firing intensified, bullets peppering the house from multiple angles. Tom and Clara moved away from the windows, taking cover behind the solid furniture. "He's trying to keep us pinned while they move closer," Tom explained, checking his weapons. His wounded shoulder throbbed, but the bleeding had slowed. "Night's coming soon. That's when they'll make their move." Clara's face was resolute in the fading light. "What's our plan?" Tom respected that she didn't ask if they would survive, only how they would fight. "There's a cellar trap door under the rug in the bedroom. Leads to a tunnel that comes out behind the ridge. Dug it when I first built the place. An escape route? Call it a marshal's insurance policy. Never know when someone from your past might come calling." Tom managed a grim smile. "Like now." "So we run?" Clara asked, her voice neutral. Tom shook his head. "No. We create a diversion, then circle around behind them. Turn the hunters into the hunted." Understanding dawned in Clara's eyes. "What kind of diversion?" Tom glanced toward the kitchen. "How do you feel about starting a fire?" The small town of Elk Fork huddled against the Montana wilderness like a child seeking shelter, its handful of wooden buildings clustered along a single rutted main street. Unlike booming Redemption Creek with its grand ambitions, Elk Fork existed primarily to serve the surrounding homesteads and ranches, a place to collect mail, send telegrams, and purchase supplies that couldn't be made at home. Tom and Clara rode into town shortly after dawn, their exhausted horses moving at a plodding walk. The night had been long and dangerous. Their escape through the cellar tunnel had succeeded, but not before setting fire to Tom's storage shed as a diversion, a painful sacrifice of tools and supplies, but necessary to draw Wade's men away from the house while they slipped away. They'd ridden through the night, taking a circuitous route to avoid pursuit, Tom fighting waves of pain from his wounded shoulder. By the time Elk Fork's modest church steeple appeared on the horizon, both riders were swaying in their saddles from fatigue. "Almost there," Tom said, his voice rough from thirst and exhaustion. Clara nodded, too tired for words. The revolver Tom had given her remained holstered at her hip, a visible reminder of all that had changed in 24 hours. No longer just a victim she had fired at Wade's men during their escape, her shots buying precious seconds for Tom to reach the horses. They drew curious stares as they rode down Main Street. Tom knew what they must look like, him with a blood-stained bandage visible beneath his torn shirt. Clara, with fading bruises on her face, both covered in dust and grime from the hard ride. Tom guided them toward a two-story building with a weathered sign reading, Dr. R. Morgan, physician and surgeon. A hitching post stood outside, currently unoccupied. Best place to start, Tom said, dismounting stiffly and helping Clara down from her horse. His wounded shoulder protested the movement, sending fresh pain radiating down his arm. The door opened before they reached it. A woman in her 40s stood framed in the doorway, her dark hair streaked with gray and pulled back in a practical bun. She wore a plain dress with an apron, and her expression was one of professional assessment rather than surprise. Thomas Halbrook, she said, her gaze moving from his bandaged shoulder to Clara's bruised face. Trouble follows you like a shadow, I see. Rebecca, Tom acknowledged with a tired nod. We could use your help. Dr. Rebecca Morgan stepped aside, gesturing them in. When don't you need my help, Tom? Come in, both of you, before you fall down where you stand. The interior was meticulously clean, with a waiting area that doubled as an examination room. Rebecca closed the door behind them, then turned the sign from open to closed. Sit, she ordered, pointing Tom toward an examination table. You too, miss. Clara Wilson, Clara supplied, sinking gratefully onto a wooden chair. Rebecca nodded, already moving to wash her hands at a basin. You can tell me what happened while I look at that shoulder, Tom. Tom grimaced as he removed his shirt, revealing the hastily bandaged wound. Ran into some disagreement with Colonel Whitmore and his associates. Rebecca's hands stilled momentarily. Ezekiel Whitmore. That explains the girl's bruises. She cast a knowing glance at Clara. His handiwork, I presume. Clara nodded, her hand unconsciously rising to her face. Not the first I've seen, Rebecca said grimly, turning her attention to Tom's shoulder. She carefully removed the blood-soaked bandage, examining the wound with practiced efficiency. Through and through, at least. Missed anything vital, but it needs proper cleaning and stitching. She worked as she talked, preparing instruments and medicines from a nearby cabinet. Start from the beginning, and don't leave anything out. Tom provided a concise account of the past 2 days, Clara's arrival at his ranch, Whitmore's visit, and the attack by Wade Dawson and his men. As he spoke, Rebecca cleaned his wound, the sting of antiseptic making him wince mid-sentence. Hold still, she admonished, threading a curved needle. This will hurt. Tom gritted his teeth as she began stitching the wound, continuing his story between controlled breaths. Need to get a telegram to Marshal Cooper in Helena. Whitmore's got the local law in his pocket. Rebecca's hands remained steady as she worked. William Cooper. Is he still the chief marshal there? Last I heard. And you think the federal marshals will intervene in what looks like a domestic dispute? It's more than that, Clara spoke up.
Colonel Whitmore, he's involved in something bigger. Bribing officials, making plans with men from back east.
Talk of restoration and the natural order. And he's killed people. I saw it. Rebecca finished the final stitch and cut the thread. That sounds like the Redemption League. Tom and Clara both turned to her with sharp interest. The what? Tom asked. Rebecca began bandaging his shoulder. It's what they call themselves, a group of former Confederate officers and sympathizers working to regain political control. They believed the South was betrayed, that Reconstruction was an injustice. Her expression grew troubled. My late husband tracked them during the war, Confederate agents attempting to organize resistance behind Union lines. After the war, they went underground, but never really disappeared. "How do you know they're operating here?" Tom asked. Rebecca secured the bandage, then moved to examine Clara's injuries. "Because Elk Fork may be small, but information still flows through it. I treat patients from all walks of life, and people talk to their doctor." She gently turned Clara's face to examine a particularly nasty bruise. "Especially when they're afraid." "Afraid of what?" Clara asked. "Change," Rebecca replied simply. "The war ended 13 years ago, but the battle for what America will become is still being fought in legislatures, in courtrooms in places like Montana Territory, where the rules are still being written." She stepped back, apparently satisfied that Clara's injuries were healing properly. Men like Whitmore see opportunity in that uncertainty. Tom absorbed this information, connecting it to what Clara had told him about Whitmore's ambitions and connections. If Rebecca was right, they were dealing with something far more dangerous than one abusive plantation owner. "We need that telegram sent," Tom said, reaching for his shirt. "And then we need somewhere safe to wait for a response." Rebecca handed him a clean shirt instead of his blood-stained one. "My late husband's. Should fit well enough." She turned to Clara. "I have a dress that might suit you better than that oversized one, and you both look like you haven't eaten in days." "Thank you," Clara said softly. Rebecca's expression softened slightly. "Rest here. I'll go to the telegraph office myself. Better that way, fewer questions." As she prepared to leave, the sound of multiple horses arriving outside froze all three of them. Tom moved swiftly to the window, peering carefully through the curtain. "Sheriff Collins," he reported grimly, "and 4 deputies, all armed." Rebecca joined him at the window. "That's not Collins. That's Marcus Whitby, Sheriff of Elk Fork." "Do you trust him?" Rebecca's hesitation was answer enough. "He's not in Whitmore's pocket, if that's what you're asking. But he's cautious. Doesn't like trouble in his town." "Well, trouble just rode in with us," Tom said, checking his revolver. "Any back way out of here? Through the storage room, but—" A heavy knock on the door interrupted her. "Dr. Morgan, it's Sheriff Whitby. Need to speak with you." Rebecca glanced at Tom, who nodded resignedly. Running would only make things worse now. "One moment, Sheriff," Rebecca called, then lowered her voice. "Let me handle this. Whitby respects me at least professionally." She opened the door to reveal a stocky man in his 50s, his sheriff's badge prominent on his vest. He removed his hat politely, but his eyes immediately found Tom and Clara behind her. "Doctor," he acknowledged, "heard we had visitors. Halbrook, isn't it? Been a while." Tom nodded. "Sheriff?" Whitby stepped inside uninvited. "Got a wire from Redemption Creek this morning. Says you're harboring a kidnapped woman and shot up some men sent to retrieve her." His gaze settled on Clara. "Would this be the woman in question?" "I wasn't kidnapped," Clara said firmly. "I escaped." Whitby's expression remained neutral. "Escaped from what, miss?" "From Colonel Ezekiel Whitmore. He's been holding me against my will for 2 years, beating me." She gestured to her face. "This is his work." The sheriff studied her bruises, then turned to Rebecca. "Doctor, your professional opinion." "Multiple contusions consistent with physical assault," Rebecca replied formally. "Defensive wounds on her arms and hands. Evidence of previous injuries that have healed improperly. In my medical judgment, this young woman has been subjected to sustained physical abuse." Whitby absorbed this information with a frown. "And your involvement, Halbrook Wire says you fired on men legally attempting to retrieve Colonel Whitmore's wife." "She's not his wife," Tom said evenly. "No legal marriage ever took place, and those men opened fire on my property without warning or legal authority." "One of them was Wade Dawson," Clara added, A bounty hunter hired by Earl to bring me back. Something shifted in Whitby's expression at the mention of Dawson. Wade Dawson. The former marshal, Tom nodded. The same. Discharged for corruption and excessive force 8 years ago. I testified at his hearing. Whitby rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. That complicates things. Sheriff, Rebecca interjected, my patients need rest and medical attention. Whatever legal matters need resolving can surely wait until they've recovered. Ordinarily, I'd agree with you, Doctor, but this isn't ordinary. Whitby turned back to Tom. Colonel Whitmore is a powerful man in this territory. He's filed formal charges of kidnapping and assault against you, Halbrook. I'm being pressed to arrest you and return Miss Wilson to his custody. And will you? Tom asked quietly. A tense silence filled the room. Tom's hand rested near his holster, though he knew drawing on a sheriff would be suicide. Finally, Whitby sighed. No, not today, at least. He looked at Clara. Miss, are you staying with Mr. Halbrook of your own free will? I am, Clara stated firmly, and you maintain that Colonel Whitmore has been abusing you and holding you against your will. Yes, and worse. Whitby nodded slowly. Then for now, I'm choosing to view this as a case of a citizen seeking protection from harm, but, he added, his tone hardening, I can't ignore formal charges indefinitely. You've got 24 hours to either move on from Elk Fork or present evidence that warrants federal intervention. We need to send a telegram to Marshal William Cooper in Helena, Tom said. He can authorize federal jurisdiction if there's evidence of cross-territorial crimes. Cooper, eh? Whitby's eyebrows rose slightly. You two have history. We served together, both as soldiers and marshals. Whitby considered this. I'll allow the telegram, but until Cooper responds, you stay here at the doctor's office. No wandering around town, no drawing attention. Understood. Tom nodded. Understood. Thank you, Sheriff. Don't thank me yet, Whitby replied grimly. Whitmore's not a man who gives up easily, and he's got friends in the territorial government. He replaced his hat, turning to leave. I'll send one of my deputies to collect your telegram. Write it clear and concise, Halbrook. You may not get a second chance. After the sheriff departed, Rebecca closed the door and leaned against it with a sigh of relief. That went better than expected. For now, Tom said, his expression troubled. But Sheriff Whitby's right. Whitmore won't give up. And 24 hours isn't much time. Then we'd better make it count, Rebecca said briskly. Write your telegram. I'll prepare food and fresh clothing for you both. And then, she added with meaningful emphasis, you can tell me everything you know about this Redemption League that Clara mentioned. Because if they're involved, we're dealing with something far more dangerous than one abusive plantation owner. Night had fallen over Elk Fork, the town's few street lamps casting pools of yellow light amid the darkness. In Rebecca Morgan's upstairs bedroom, Clara sat by the window watching the empty street below. The borrowed dress from Rebecca fit her better than Sarah Halbrook's had, though it still hung loosely on her thin frame. Tom and Rebecca were downstairs waiting for a response to the telegram they'd sent hours earlier. The message had been urgent, but carefully worded, mentioning evidence of corruption, murder, and potential conspiracy involving influential figures across territorial lines. Tom had signed it with regulator, an old code word from his days working with Cooper, ensuring the marshal would know the message was genuine. Clara's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Rebecca entered, carrying a tray with tea and bread. You should eat something, she said, setting the tray down. Keep your strength up. Clara managed a small smile. Thank you. For everything. Rebecca sat on the edge of the bed studying Clara with the same clinical attention she'd shown when treating her injuries. How long were you with Whitmore? 2 years, 1 month, and 16 days, Clara replied without hesitation. I counted each one. And before that, my father was a preacher in Ohio, small church, smaller congregation. After my mother died, he started drinking. Clara stared into her tea. We lost the church, moved west for a fresh start, he said, but things only got worse. And Whitmore, my father owed him money from gambling. A lot of money. Clara's voice grew flat, emotionless. Earl offered to cancel the debt if he could have me instead. My father agreed. I was 17. Rebecca's expression remained professional, but her eyes reflected contained fury. And there was no actual marriage ceremony. No, just papers my father signed. Earl told everyone I was his wife, kept me isolated at the estate. Clara set down her teacup, her hands suddenly trembling. The things he made me do. You don't have to speak of it, Rebecca said gently. No, I need to. Clara straightened her shoulders. Because it wasn't just me. There were others. Girls who worked in the house who disappeared if they caught Earl's attention for too long. And not just girls. Anyone who defied him. Like Moses? Rebecca asked, recalling the name from earlier. Clara nodded, her eyes haunted. Moses was kind to me. Brought me extra food when Earl had me locked away as punishment. Earl found out and... She swallowed hard. He beat him to death in the yard. Made everyone watch. Were there witnesses besides Whitmore's people? Everyone at the estate saw it, but they're all terrified of him. Rebecca was silent for a moment, processing this information. Clara, if what you're saying is true, and I believe it is, then Whitmore is guilty of multiple murders, not just abuse. I know. That's what I've been trying to tell Tom. It's not just about me, or even about the awful things Earl has done. It's about what he's planning. The Redemption League, Rebecca said. Clara nodded. He meets with men from back east. Important men with money and influence. They talk about reclaiming their birthright and restoring the natural order. Earl's running for territorial governor next year, but that's just the beginning. The beginning of what? Something they call the Great Reversal. I don't know exactly what it means, but from what I overheard, they're organizing across multiple territories and states, building influence, placing their people in positions of power. Clara's voice dropped lower, and eliminating those who stand in their way. A heavy silence filled the room, broken only by the distant sounds of the small town settling into night. We need to tell Tom, Rebecca said, finally rising to her feet. Tell me what? They turned to find Tom standing in the doorway, his expression grave. There's more to Whitmore's plans than we realized, Rebecca began, but Tom cut her off with a raised hand. That will have to wait. We've got a more immediate problem. He entered the room, fully closing the door behind him. Just got word from my contact at the telegraph office. A large group of riders was spotted heading this way from Redemption Creek. At least 15 men, all armed. Clara paled. Earl? Tom nodded grimly. Looks like he's not waiting for legal channels. Sheriff Whitby's organizing his deputies, but he's only got 5 men. What do we do? Clara asked, rising from her chair. We need to move. Now. Tom checked his revolver. Rebecca is there somewhere in town Clara could hide until the marshal arrives from Helena. Rebecca considered this. The church has a hidden room in the basement, used during the war to shelter escaped slaves heading north. Pastor Stevens would help. Good. Take her there. Tom moved to the window, scanning the darkened street. I'll join Sheriff Whitby. If Whitmore wants a fight, I aim to give him one. No, Clara said firmly, surprising both Tom and Rebecca. I'm not hiding anymore. Clara, these men are... I know exactly what they are she interrupted. "I've lived with their kind for 2 years, and I'm done running from them." Her blue eyes blazed with sudden determination. "Earl thinks I'm weak. He thinks I'm property. I want him to see me standing against him." Tom studied her for a long moment, recognizing the resolve in her expression. It was the same look he'd seen in the eyes of freedmen who chose to fight rather than flee, even against impossible odds. "All right," he said finally, "but you stay with Rebecca. And at the first sign of real trouble, you both get to that church." Before either woman could respond, the sound of a gunshot echoed through the night, followed by shouting from the street below. Tom moved swiftly to the window. In the dim light of the street lamps, he could see a group of riders entering the town from the west, moving in a disciplined formation that spoke of military experience. At their head rode Earl Whitmore, his tall figure unmistakable even at a distance. "They're here," Tom said, reaching for his hat. "Earlier than expected." Rebecca joined him at the window, her expression hardening as she recognized the riders. "That's not 15 men, that's closer to 30. "Whitmore's not taking chances," Tom muttered, checking his ammunition. His wounded shoulder still ached, but the fresh bandaging had helped. "Rebecca, get Clara to the church. I'll find Sheriff Whitby." "It's too late for that," Rebecca replied, pointing down the street where Whitby and his deputies were already moving to intercept the approaching riders. "They've set up a barricade at the edge of town." The three watched as Sheriff Whitby raised a hand, halting Whitmore's procession. Even from a distance, the tension was palpable. Whitby stood with his deputies outnumbered, but determined to maintain order in his town. Whitmore remained mounted, looking down at the sheriff with visible disdain. "We need to get closer," Tom said, moving toward the door. "I need to hear what's being said." They descended the stairs, quickly emerging onto the boardwalk outside Rebecca's office. Other townspeople had begun to gather as well, drawn by the commotion. Tom, Clara, and Rebecca moved cautiously toward the confrontation, staying within the shadows of the buildings. From their new position, they could hear the exchange between Whitby and Whitmore. This is an official posse, Sheriff," Whitmore was saying, his cultured Virginia accent carrying clearly in the night air. "We're pursuing a kidnapped woman and the man who took her." "Your posse looks more like an army colonel," Whitby replied evenly. "And I wasn't aware you had jurisdiction in Elk Fork." "I have jurisdiction wherever my property is concerned," Whitmore snapped. "Clara Whitmore is my lawfully wedded wife, and Thomas Halbrook abducted her from my home." "I've spoken with the young lady in question," Whitby said. "She disputes your version of events. Claims she fled from abuse, and that no legal marriage ever took place." Murmurs ran through the gathered townspeople. Tom noticed several women exchanging knowing glances. Perhaps they'd heard rumors about Whitmore's treatment of his wife. Whitmore's expression darkened. "The girl is mentally unbalanced. Her father signed her into my care precisely because of her delusions and hysteria. I have the documentation to prove it." "Convenient documentation, I'm sure," Whitby responded, his tone making it clear he wasn't convinced. "Regardless, Colonel, I cannot allow 30 armed men to storm my town. If you have legal grievances, they can be addressed through proper channels." "I've tried proper channels," Whitmore said, his voice hardening. "I've filed charges with your territorial counterpart in Redemption Creek. I've submitted formal complaints to Judge Harper. And what have I received in return? Delays, excuses." He leaned forward in his saddle. "Meanwhile, my wife remains in the clutches of a man with a history of violence." Tom tensed at the reference to his past. Beside him, Clara gripped his arm in silent support. "I'm aware of Marshal Halbrook's record," Whitby replied. 20 years of distinguished service to the federal government. If you're referring to incidents during the war, I'd remind you that many men on both sides have actions they regret from that time. I'm referring to the execution of civilians, Sheriff, Whitmore said loudly, clearly playing to the growing crowd. Did you know your distinguished marshal ordered the hanging of a young man suspected of being a Confederate spy? A boy of 19 with no trial, no evidence beyond hearsay. A ripple of unease passed through the onlookers. Tom's jaw tightened, old memories threatening to surface. "That's a matter for military history, Colonel," Whitby said. "We're concerned with the present. And, in the present, I have a young woman seeking protection from abuse, and a sworn statement from Dr. Morgan documenting her injuries." "Dr. Morgan," Whitmore scoffed. "Another unionist with an agenda. Her testimony means nothing." From the shadows, Rebecca stiffened at the insult. Tom placed a restraining hand on her arm. "Colonel Whitmore," Whitby said, his patience visibly wearing thin. "I'm going to ask you once more to dismiss your men and address your grievances through proper legal channels. A telegram has been sent to the Federal Marshal's office in Helena. They will determine jurisdiction in this matter." Whitmore's laugh was cold. "The Federal Marshals, of course. More northern interference in local affairs." He straightened in his saddle, surveying the crowd that had gathered. "People of Elk Fork, I come seeking only what is rightfully mine. My wife, who has been taken from me by a man with a vendetta against Southerners like myself. Is this the justice you want in your town, where a man's family can be stolen from him by federal agents?" His words struck a chord with some in the crowd, particularly older men who might have fought for the Confederacy. Tom could see the town dividing before his eyes, those sympathetic to Whitmore's Southern charm, and those suspicious of his methods and motives. "That's enough, Colonel," Whitby said firmly. "My decision stands. Disband your men or face arrest for disturbing the peace." Whitmore's expression shifted to something harder, more calculating. "Very well, Sheriff. I can see reasoned discussion isn't possible here." He raised his hand, and his men began to spread out along the edge of town. "But know this, I will have my wife back, and those who have interfered will answer for it." As Whitmore turned his horse to leave, his gaze swept across the gathered townspeople and locked directly onto Tom, Clara, and Rebecca standing in the shadows. A slow, cold smile spread across his face. "Well, speaking of interference..." Tom immediately pushed Clara behind him, drawing his revolver in the same motion. Around them, townspeople scattered, sensing the imminent violence. "Stay back, Whitmore," Tom called, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent street. "The lady's under my protection." "The lady," Whitmore emphasized mockingly, "is my wife. And you, Halbrook, are a kidnapper and a murderer." "The only murderer here is you," Clara said, stepping out from behind Tom despite his attempt to shield her. Her voice rang clear in the night air. "I saw what you did to Moses, to those girls who worked in your house. I know about the meetings, the bribes, the plans you're making with the Redemption League." A murmur ran through the crowd at the name. Even some of Whitmore's men exchanged uneasy glances. Whitmore's smile vanished, replaced by cold fury. "You see, Sheriff," he said to Whitby, without taking his eyes off Clara. "Delusions, hysteria. The girl needs medical attention and supervision, not encouragement in her fantasies." "They are not fantasies," Clara replied steadily. "I have proof. The documents from your study, the ones you keep in the safe behind your portrait, the letters from Senator Hampton and Judge Thornton, the lists of officials you've bribed across 3 territories." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Whitmore's face. "You're bluffing. Those papers are secure." "Are they?" Clara's expression remained determined. "I lived in that house for 2 years, Earl. I watched. I listened. I learned every corner, every hiding place. Did you really think I wouldn't find a way into your precious study, that I wouldn't make copies of what I found there?" It was a brilliant bluff, Tom realized. Clara had mentioned the documents before, but never claimed to have copies. Yet the effect on Whitmore was immediate and dramatic. "Seize them," Whitmore ordered, pointing at Tom and Clara. "All of them, now." His men surged forward, but Sheriff Whitby and his deputies moved to intercept, forming a protective line. "Stand down, Colonel!" Whitby shouted. "This is still my town." Gunfire erupted. It was impossible to tell who fired first. People screamed, running for cover as bullets splintered wood and shattered windows. Tom grabbed Clara and Rebecca, pulling them behind a water trough, as the street erupted into chaos. All around them, the night exploded with muzzle flashes and the thunder of gunshots. "We need to get to cover!" Tom shouted over the noise. "Rebecca, where's the nearest safe building?" "The church." Rebecca pointed toward a white steeple visible 2 blocks away. "Underground room," I mentioned. Tom nodded, scanning the battlefield that Main Street had become. Sheriff Whitby and his deputies were engaged in a fierce exchange with Whitmore's men, both sides using wagons and water troughs for cover. The advantage of numbers was with Whitmore, but Whitby's men had the benefit of familiar terrain. "Wait for my signal," Tom instructed, checking his revolver. "When I start firing, run for that alley. Don't stop. Don't look back." Clara gripped his arm. "Tom, your shoulder. We'll have to manage," he finished grimly. "Ready." Both women nodded, determination overriding fear in their expressions. Tom took a deep breath, then rose and fired 3 rapid shots toward Whitmore's men, forcing them to duck for cover. "Now!" he shouted. Clara and Rebecca sprinted for the alley, Tom following close behind, firing as he ran. They had nearly reached safety when a bullet struck the building beside Clara's head, showering her with splinters. She stumbled, and Tom caught her arm, dragging her the final few feet into the sheltering darkness of the alley. "Are you hit?" he demanded, checking her quickly. "No," Clara gasped. "Just startled." They moved swiftly through the alley, the sounds of gunfire receding slightly behind them. The church was visible at the next intersection, its white walls gleaming in the moonlight. "Almost there," Rebecca encouraged, leading the way. They were halfway across the open street when a mounted figure appeared at the intersection, Wade Dawson, his gun already raised. "End of the road, Halbrook," he called, firing. The bullet caught Tom in his already wounded shoulder, spinning him around. He crashed to the ground, his revolver skittering away across the dirt. Clara screamed his name, starting toward him, but Rebecca held her back as Wade dismounted, approaching Tom with his gun trained on the fallen man. "Been waiting for this moment for 8 years, Wade said, standing over Tom. "Ever since you testified against me. Cost me my badge, my reputation." He cocked his revolver. "Colonel Whitmore says to bring you in alive if possible, but I reckon dead will do just fine." Tom looked up at his former colleague, blood seeping through his bandaged shoulder. "You were a good lawman once, Wade, before the money corrupted you. Save your sermons for your maker Halbrook. You'll be meeting him shortly." As Wade took aim, a shot rang out, not from Wade's gun, but from behind him. Wade staggered, a look of surprise crossing his face as he crumpled to the ground. Tom looked up to see Clara standing there, his fallen revolver in her hands, smoke still curling from the barrel. "You were right," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Point and pull. Can't miss at close range." The church basement was cold and musty, illuminated only by a single oil lamp that cast long shadows across the stone walls. Tom lay on a narrow cot, his face pale and drawn with pain as Rebecca worked on his shoulder. The bullet had reopened his previous wound and lodged deep in the muscle. "Hold him steady," Rebecca instructed Clara, who pressed down on Tom's uninjured shoulder. Tom gritted his teeth as Rebecca probed the wound with forceps. "How bad?" he managed to ask. "Bad enough," Rebecca replied grimly. "The bullet's fragmented. I need to get all the pieces out, or infection will set in." She glanced at Clara. "There's a bottle of whiskey in my medical bag. He's going to need it." Clara retrieved the bottle, helping Tom take a long swallow. The liquor burned down his throat, providing meager comfort against the pain to come. "What's happening outside?" he asked, trying to focus on something besides Rebecca's instruments. "Pastor Stevens went to check," Clara said, wiping sweat from Tom's brow with a damp cloth. "The shooting stopped about 20 minutes ago." Tom nodded, then sucked in a sharp breath as Rebecca extracted a bullet fragment. "Wade?" he asked through clenched teeth. "Dead," Clara answered softly. I killed him." Her voice held a mixture of horror and resolve. Tom reached for her hand with his good arm squeezing it weakly. "You saved my life," he said. "Remember that." Clara nodded, though her eyes remained troubled. Taking a life, even in defense of another, left marks on the soul that time could never fully erase. Tom knew this better than most. The door to the basement opened, and Pastor James Stevens descended the stairs. In his 60s, with a shock of white hair and deeply lined face, Stevens had the weathered look of a man who had witnessed much of life's suffering but maintained his faith nonetheless. "It's quieted down," he reported, his voice low and gravelly. "Sheriff Whitby's men have pushed Whitmore's forces to the edge of town. 2 of Whitby's deputies were wounded, one seriously. No word on casualties among Whitmore's men." "And Whitmore himself?" Tom asked, wincing as Rebecca extracted another fragment. "Still out there coordinating his men." Stevens moved closer, studying Tom's wound with concern. "They've surrounded the town. No one gets in or out." "A siege," Tom muttered. "He's trying to wait us out." "Or force the townspeople to turn against us," Rebecca added, dropping another bullet fragment into a metal bowl. "Cut off from supplies, facing armed men at their doorsteps, people might decide we're not worth the trouble." Tom knew she was right. Even the most principled communities had breaking points. Fear for family and livelihood could overcome moral convictions, especially when the danger came from standing up for strangers. "What about the telegram to Marshal Cooper?" Clara asked. "Shouldn't help be on the way from Helena?" If the telegram got through, Rebecca said, her focus still on Tom's wound. "And if Cooper was there to receive it? And if he can gather enough men quickly?" She met Tom's gaze. "That's a lot of ifs, and Helena is 2 days' hard ride from here." Tom nodded grimly. They couldn't count on outside help arriving in time. "We need leverage," he said. "Something to make Whitmore back down." "We already tried that," Clara pointed out. "My bluff about having copies of his documents. He didn't back down, he escalated." "Because he knew it was a bluff," Tom replied. "We need something real, something that would destroy him if revealed." Rebecca finished extracting the last bullet fragment and began cleaning the wound. "Whatever it is, we need to find it quickly. By morning, Whitmore will have this town completely surrounded, and any sympathetic residents intimidated into silence." Pastor Stevens had been listening quietly, his weathered hands clasped before him. Now he spoke, his voice thoughtful. "Perhaps we already have what we need." The others turned to him questioningly. "Miss Wilson's testimony," Stevens elaborated, combined with Dr. Morgan's medical documentation of her injuries, and now Whitmore's armed assault on a peaceful town. If properly witnessed and recorded, these could constitute federal crimes. Testimony alone won't be enough, Tom said, grimacing as Rebecca began stitching his wound. Not against a man with Whitmore's connections. We need physical evidence. What about Wade Dawson? Clara suggested suddenly. He was working for Earl. Might he have had orders, letters, something in writing? Tom's eyes widened slightly. His saddlebags. Wade always kept important documents in his saddlebags, a habit from his marshal days. His horse ran off after, Clara faltered. After what happened? But it might not have gone far. I'll go, Pastor Stevens volunteered. I can move around town more freely than any of you. Where did this encounter take place? The intersection near Simmons's general store, Rebecca supplied. But be careful, James. Whitmore's men will be watching. Stevens nodded solemnly. The Lord watches over his flock, Rebecca, even the black sheep like our former marshal here. He offered Tom a small smile before ascending the stairs. After he'd gone, Rebecca finished bandaging Tom's shoulder. That's the best I can do for now. The wound needs proper medical attention, but it should hold if infection doesn't set in. Tom thanked her, then tried to sit up. The room spun momentarily, but he fought through the dizziness. We need a backup plan. If Dawson's saddlebags don't yield anything useful, we'll need another way to neutralize Whitmore. Could we escape? Clara asked. Pastor Stevens mentioned a tunnel used by escaping slaves. Could we use it to get out of town? Rebecca considered this. The tunnel leads to a creek bed about a mile outside town. But in your condition, Tom, I'm not sure you'd make it that far. And even if you did, Whitmore's men are patrolling the outskirts. Tom leaned back against the wall, conserving his strength. What about the townspeople? How many might stand with Sheriff Whitby if it comes to a direct confrontation? Hard to say, Rebecca replied, packing away her medical supplies. Elk Fork isn't Redemption Creek. We don't have the same Southern sympathies here, but fear is a powerful motivator, and Whitmore has 30 armed men. Clara had been quiet, her expression thoughtful. Now she spoke up. There's something I haven't told you. About Earl's plans. Tom and Rebecca turned to her with renewed attention. The Redemption League isn't just planning to influence elections or buy officials, Clara continued. They're stockpiling weapons, military-grade rifles, ammunition, even artillery pieces smuggled back from the war. For what purpose? Rebecca asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer. Earl called it the Second Rising, Clara said quietly. A coordinated effort across multiple territories and states. They believe the federal government is vulnerable, overextended, that with the right pressure in the right places, they could force concessions, autonomy for certain regions, reversal of Reconstruction policies, maybe even secession for some states. Tom exchanged a troubled glance with Rebecca. What Clara was describing wasn't just criminal conspiracy. It was insurrection. Did you ever see these weapons? Tom asked. Clara nodded. Earl has a hidden storehouse on his property. Behind the main barn, there's a root cellar that leads to a larger underground room. I found it by accident when I was trying to hide from him during one of his episodes. How many weapons are we talking about? Dozens of rifles, crates of ammunition, 2 small cannons. Clara's eyes reflected the gravity of what she'd discovered. And maps, detailed maps of federal installations across several territories. Tom absorbed this information with growing alarm. If Clara was right, the Redemption League posed a far greater threat than he'd initially realized. This wasn't just about one abusive plantation owner or even a corrupt political network. It was about armed rebellion. We need to get this information to Marshal Cooper immediately, he said. This goes beyond local jurisdiction. It's a matter for the federal government. But how? Rebecca asked. We're trapped here, and there's no guarantee our telegram even reached Helena. Before Tom could respond, they heard footsteps on the stairs. Pastor Stevens returned his expression triumphant as he held up a pair of worn leather saddlebags. Found them, he announced. The horse had wandered into Mrs. Leary's vegetable garden, still saddled. He handed the bags to Tom. I had to avoid 2 of Whitmore's patrols. They're tightening their grip on the town. Tom opened the saddlebags, eagerly sorting through the contents. There were personal items, a razor, spare ammunition, a flask, but also a packet of letters tied with string. Tom untied them, scanning the first page. These are from Whitmore, he confirmed, reading quickly. Instructions to Dawson about tracking Clara, authorized use of force. He paused, his expression darkening. And a list of other problems to be permanently resolved once Clara was secured. What kind of problems? Rebecca asked. People, Tom clarified grimly. Specifically, a territorial judge who's been resisting Whitmore's influence, a newspaper editor in Helena who's been investigating land fraud, and... He broke off, looking up at Clara. Your father. My father. Clara's voice wavered. But he's dead. Consumption last winter. Tom handed her the letter. According to this, Whitmore had Dawson poison him, made it look like tuberculosis. Clara stared at the letter, her hands trembling as she read the cold, businesslike description of her father's murder. He was afraid, she whispered. Before he died, my father tried to send me away. Said he'd made a terrible mistake. Tears filled her eyes. I thought he was delirious from fever, but he knew what Earl was capable of. Rebecca placed a comforting hand on Clara's shoulder as the young woman struggled to compose herself. There's more, Tom continued, examining another document. Financial records, payments to officials across 3 territories, judges, sheriffs, newspaper editors. He looked up. This is the evidence we need. Proof of a criminal conspiracy spanning multiple jurisdictions, exactly what would trigger federal intervention. And proof of murder, Pastor Stevens added solemnly. Conspiracy to commit murder at the very least. Tom nodded, gathering the documents carefully. Now we just need to get this information to Marshal Cooper. But how? Clara asked, wiping away her tears. We're still surrounded. Tom was silent for a moment, thinking. Then he turned to Pastor Stevens. You mentioned the tunnel used by escaping slaves. How well known is it? Only to a few of us who worked on the Underground Railroad during the war, Stevens replied. Whitmore wouldn't know about it. Good. We need someone to take these documents through that tunnel and ride to Helena. Tom looked at each of them in turn. I'd go myself, but in my condition, I wouldn't make it far if pursued. I'll go, Clara volunteered immediately. Tom shook his head. You're the key witness, Clara. If anything happened to you, our case against Whitmore weakens significantly. I'll go, Rebecca decided. I know the way to Helena, and I can authenticate the medical evidence regarding Clara's injuries. Pastor Stevens nodded in agreement. Rebecca's right. She's our best option. And she can take my horse. Whitmore's men won't be looking for her specifically. Tom considered, then nodded. All right. Rebecca goes tonight under cover of darkness. The rest of us need to hold out until help arrives from Helena, ideally 2 days. And if Whitmore makes his move before then, Clara asked. Then we do what we must, Tom replied grimly. But these documents change everything. If Whitmore knew we had them, he'd burn the town to the ground to get them back. Which is why we need to make copies, Pastor Stevens suggested. Keep the originals safe with Rebecca. but have duplicates here as insurance." "Good thinking," Tom agreed. "Clara, you and the pastor start copying the most important documents. I need to rest if I'm going to be any use tomorrow." As Clara and Stevens began the painstaking work of copying the letters, Tom leaned back on his cot, fighting waves of pain from his shoulder. The blood loss and trauma were taking their toll, but he couldn't afford to succumb to weakness. Not yet. Not with so much at stake. His thoughts drifted to Sarah and Emma, as they often did in moments of quiet reflection. What would Sarah think of all this? She had always believed in standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult. Especially when it was difficult. "I'm trying, Sarah," he whispered to himself. "I'm trying to live a life that means something." With that thought, he drifted into an uneasy sleep. Tom awoke to the sound of urgent voices. Disoriented, he tried to sit up, gasping as pain shot through his shoulder. "Easy," Clara cautioned, helping him into a sitting position. "You've been asleep for hours." Tom blinked, his mind clearing. The church basement was now filled with morning light streaming through small ground-level windows. Pastor Stevens stood near the stairs, deep in conversation with Sheriff Whitby. "What's happening?" Tom asked, his voice rough with sleep. Whitby turned, his expression grim. "Whitmore's issued an ultimatum. He wants Clara and all evidence against him surrendered by noon. Otherwise, he starts burning buildings." "Rebecca?" Tom asked, suddenly alarmed. "Did she get away?" "Yes," Stevens confirmed. "Left through the tunnel around midnight. Should be well on her way to Helena by now." Tom nodded, relieved. "And the documents?" "Originals with Rebecca. Copies hidden here," Clara replied. She handed him a cup of water. "We finished just before dawn." Tom drank gratefully, then addressed Whitby. "How are your men holding up, Sheriff?" Whitby sighed heavily. "Too wounded, as you know. The rest are tired, outnumbered, and running low on ammunition. Most of the townspeople have barricaded themselves in their homes." He rubbed his jaw wearily. "Some are talking about giving you up to save the town." "Can't blame them," Tom said. "They didn't ask for this fight." "No, but it found them anyway." Whitby straightened his shoulders. "I've been sheriff here for 15 years, sworn to uphold the law. And what Whitmore's doing isn't law, it's tyranny. Even so, we can't let innocent people suffer," Tom said, struggling to his feet. Clara moved to support him, concern evident in her face. "How many men does Whitmore have now?" "At least 30, maybe more," Whitby replied. "He's positioned them around the town perimeter. Main concentration at the eastern approach, blocking the road to Helena." Tom nodded, processing this information. "And how many can you count on? Truly count on?" "My 3 remaining deputies for certain. Maybe a dozen townsmen who've volunteered to help defend their homes." Whitby's expression was bleak. "Not enough for a direct confrontation." "Then we don't confront him directly," Tom said, moving stiffly to a small table where a rough map of Elk Fork had been drawn. "We need to buy time. 2 days minimum. That's how long it will take Rebecca to reach Helena and return with federal marshals." 2 days? Whitby looked skeptical. "Whitmore's not a patient man, Tom, and he's got a small army out there." "An army needs supplies," Tom pointed out. "Food, water, ammunition. They can't live off the land indefinitely, especially if they're maintaining a perimeter around the town." Pastor Stevens joined them at the table, his weathered face thoughtful. "What are you suggesting, Tom?" "Guerrilla tactics," Tom replied. "Hit-and-run strikes to deplete their resources and morale. We can't beat them in a straight fight, but we can wear them down." He traced a finger along the map. "Whitmore's men are scattered around the town perimeter. That means they're spread thin in places, vulnerable. Whitby considered this. Risky. If we lose men, our position weakens further. More risky than waiting for Whitmore to burn the town building by building, Tom countered. He won't stop with just one. Men like him never do. A heavy silence fell as they all contemplated this grim reality. Finally, Clara spoke. What if we gave him what he wants, or what he thinks he wants? The men turned to her in surprise. I could surrender myself. She continued, her voice steady despite the fear visible in her eyes. Not really, of course, but make him think I have. Buy us more time. Absolutely not, Tom said firmly. Whitmore would never let you live once he had you. You know too much. I'm not suggesting actually putting myself in his hands, Clara clarified, just making him believe I'm willing to negotiate. A meeting, perhaps. Somewhere public with witnesses. Whitby frowned. What would that accomplish? Distraction. Tom realized, studying Clara with newfound respect. While Whitmore's focused on the negotiation, we could be positioning our people for countermoves. Clara nodded. Exactly. And it would give us a chance to assess his forces more accurately. Maybe even sow doubt among his men about what they're really fighting for. Pastor Stevens looked troubled. It would be extraordinarily dangerous for you, Clara. My whole life with Earl was dangerous, she replied simply. At least this time, the risk would serve a purpose beyond his ego. Tom still didn't like it, but he had to admit the strategic value of her suggestion. If, and I mean if we considered this, it would need elaborate safeguards. You wouldn't actually meet with Whitmore alone. There would be conditions, neutral ground, armed escorts. The church, Pastor Stevens suggested, sacred ground. Even Whitmore might hesitate to commit violence there. Whitby rubbed his chin thoughtfully. It could work, especially if we use the distraction to position men at key points around town. Tom studied the map again, his tactical mind already formulating plans despite his reservations. We'd need to ensure Clara's safety above all else, and we'd need a contingency plan if Whitmore tries to double-cross us. He will try, Clara said with certainty. Earl never negotiates in good faith. But that predictability is itself a weakness we can exploit. Tom looked at her with growing admiration. The terrified young woman who had stumbled onto his property just days ago had found remarkable courage and clarity in the crucible of crisis. All right, he decided. We'll craft a response to Whitmore's ultimatum. Propose a meeting at the church at 3 o'clock that gives us time to prepare. He turned to Whitby. Can you deliver the message? The sheriff nodded. I can, but what exactly are we preparing for, Tom? Whitmore's reaction will tell us everything, Tom explained. If he agrees too readily, he's planning treachery. If he hesitates or adds conditions, he's uncertain, which means we've already created doubt. And if he refuses outright, Pastor Stevens asked, then we know he's committed to violence, and we adjust accordingly. Tom's expression hardened. Either way, we're not surrendering Clara or the evidence. We're playing for time, nothing more. As they began drafting the response to Whitmore, a commotion erupted outside. Shouts and the sound of running feet filtered down to the basement. Whitby drew his revolver, moving swiftly to the stairs. Stay here, he ordered before disappearing up the steps. Tense minutes passed. Tom struggled to his feet, determined to face whatever new threat had emerged. Clara helped him stand, supporting his weight as best she could. When Whitby returned, his expression was unreadable. You all need to come up. Now. What's happened? Tom demanded. Just come, Whitby replied, already turning back up the stairs. With Clara's assistance, Tom climbed the steps, emerging into the church's main sanctuary. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the wooden pews. The space was empty, except for Pastor Stevens's wife Martha, who stood near the front doors, her face pale with shock. "Martha." Stevens moved quickly to his wife's side. "What is it?" Before she could answer, the church doors swung open. Sheriff Whitby entered, followed by two men Tom didn't recognize, both wearing the unmistakable badges of U.S. Marshals. And behind them, limping slightly, but very much alive, came William Cooper. Tom stared in disbelief. Cooper was in his early 60s now, his hair completely silver, but he still carried himself with the ramrod-straight posture of a lifelong lawman. His weathered face broke into a slight smile at Tom's expression. "Halbrook," he greeted, his voice as gravelly as Tom remembered. "You look like hell." "Cooper," Tom managed, still stunned by the man's unexpected appearance. "How?" "Got your telegram yesterday morning," Cooper explained. "Rebecca Morgan found us on the road about 10 miles outside of town. She had quite a story to tell." His gaze shifted to Clara. "And I assume this is Miss Wilson." Clara nodded, clearly intimidated by the sudden arrival of federal authority. "Sir," she acknowledged respectfully. Cooper studied her bruised face, his expression softening slightly. "Dr. Morgan showed us her medical assessment of your injuries, Miss Wilson. Comprehensive and disturbing documentation." "And the documents?" Tom asked urgently. "The evidence against Whitmore?" "Safe," Cooper confirmed. "And damning. Conspiracy, bribery, murder for hire across territorial lines." He turned back to Tom. "You've stirred up one hell of a hornet's nest, old friend." "Not intentionally," Tom said wryly. "Just trying to help a young woman in trouble." Cooper's expression grew serious. "It's more than that. The Redemption League is real, and from what we've gathered, far more dangerous than anyone suspected. Whitmore's just one node in a network that spans half the Western Territories." "So you believe us?" Clara asked, hope evident in her voice. "We do," Cooper affirmed. "The evidence is compelling, especially when combined with other intelligence we've been gathering. That's why I brought 20 marshals with me, not just the usual 4-man detail." Tom felt a wave of relief so powerful it nearly buckled his knees. After days of fighting alone against overwhelming odds, help had finally arrived. And not just any help, but federal marshals led by William Cooper himself. "What about Whitmore and his men?" Whitby asked. "They've surrounded the town." "Not anymore," Cooper replied with grim satisfaction. "We approached from the north, caught them completely by surprise. Half of them scattered when they saw federal badges. The rest surrendered without a fight, mercenaries mostly with no real loyalty to Whitmore's cause." "And Whitmore himself," Tom pressed. Cooper's expression darkened. "Holed up in the Elk Fork Hotel with about 10 diehards. They've barricaded the doors and windows, threatening to burn the place down if we try to take them by force." "Hostages?" Whitby asked sharply. "None, thankfully. We evacuated the hotel staff and guests before they realized what was happening." Tom absorbed this information, his tactical mind already assessing options. "So it's a standoff." "For now," Cooper agreed. "I've positioned men around the building, but I'm hoping to resolve this without bloodshed if possible." He turned to Clara. "Whitmore's asking for you, Miss Wilson. Says he'll surrender peacefully if you speak with him first." Clara paled, but her voice remained steady. "It's a trap. Earl would never surrender willingly." "I agree," Cooper said, "which is why I refused his request. But I thought you should know." "What happens now?" Pastor Stevens asked. Cooper straightened his manner, becoming more formal. "Now I fulfill my duty as a U.S. Marshal. Ezekiel Whitmore is wanted for conspiracy bribery of public officials, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit murder, all federal offenses. I intend to take him into custody and transport him to Helena for trial." "And if he refuses to come peacefully?" Tom asked, though he already knew the answer. Cooper's eyes hardened. "Then he'll learn why the federal government doesn't negotiate with insurrectionists." He nodded toward the door. "My men are preparing to move in at noon. I'd suggest you all remain here in the church until this is resolved." As Cooper turned to leave, Tom called after him. "William, thank you for coming so quickly." Cooper paused, looking back. "You served with distinction for 20 years, Tom. Did you really think we'd abandon you when you needed help?" A rare smile softened his weathered features. "Besides, Sarah would never forgive me if I let anything happen to you." With that, he departed, leaving Tom with a lump in his throat at the mention of his late wife. Cooper and Sarah had been friends since before the war, united by their unwavering belief in justice and equality under the law. As the church doors closed behind Cooper, Tom turned to the others. "We're not staying here," he declared. "Whitmore's cornered, which makes him more dangerous than ever." "What are you suggesting?" Whitby asked cautiously. "Cooper's planning a frontal assault at noon. Whitmore will be expecting that." Tom's eyes gleamed with tactical insight. "But what he won't expect is an approach from below." "Below?" Clara echoed in confusion. The Elk Fork Hotel was built on the site of an old trading post. Pastor Stevens explained, comprehension dawning on his face. "There are cellar storage rooms that extend beyond the current building's footprint." "And you know how to access them?" Tom asked. Stevens nodded. "Through the adjacent mercantile. Martha's brother owns it." "Then that's our way in," Tom decided. "Whitby, can you coordinate with Cooper Keep?" His attention focused on the front of the hotel while we approach from below. The sheriff hesitated. "This isn't your fight anymore, Tom. Cooper's here with federal authority. Why risk yourself further?" Tom glanced at Clara, standing resolute despite her fear. "Because Whitmore hurt this young woman under my protection. Because he threatens everything I've spent my life defending. And because Sarah would expect nothing less of me." Whitby studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. I'll speak with Cooper." As they began planning their approach, Clara moved to Tom's side. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. "You've already risked everything for me. Your home, your life." Tom placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "Some things are worth risking everything for, Clara. Justice, freedom, the chance to build a world where people like Whitmore can't prey on the vulnerable." He smiled slightly. "I may be old and battered, but I've got one good fight left in me." Clara's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she squeezed his hand. "Then let's make it count." The cellar beneath the Elk Fork Mercantile was dim and musty, smelling of earth and old potatoes. Tom moved carefully through the narrow space, mindful of his injured shoulder, with Clara close behind him. Pastor Stevens led the way, holding a lantern that cast long, wavering shadows across the dirt floor. "The passage should be just ahead," Stevens whispered, directing the lantern's beam toward a section of wall partially obscured by stacked crates. "Behind those supplies." Tom nodded, his senses heightened by decades of experience in dangerous situations. Though his body ached and his wounds throbbed, his mind remained sharp, calculating each movement, each potential risk. They had left Sheriff Whitby to coordinate with Cooper, ensuring the marshals would focus their attention on the hotel's main entrance, while Tom, Clara, and Stevens attempted their clandestine approach. It was nearly noon, the deadline Cooper had set for Whitmore's surrender. "Are you sure about this?" Clara asked softly as they reached the crates. Your shoulder. I've operated under worse conditions, Tom replied, though the pain in his shoulder suggested otherwise. Besides, you're the one who'll have the harder task. Clara's role in their plan was crucial and dangerous, a final confrontation with the man who had terrorized her for 2 years. She had insisted on being part of this despite Tom's initial reluctance. I need to see his face when he realizes he's lost, she had explained. Not for vengeance, but for closure. Tom understood. Some wounds could only heal when faced directly. Stevens moved the crates aside, revealing a low archway cut into the stone foundation. This passage connects to the hotel's old wine cellar, he explained. It was used during Prohibition to move liquor secretly between businesses. How fitting, Tom remarked dryly. Criminal infrastructure serving justice. Stevens offered a thin smile. The Lord works in mysterious ways. The passage was narrow and low-ceilinged, forcing Tom to hunch uncomfortably as they moved through it. The pain in his shoulder intensified with each step, but he pushed it aside, focusing on the task ahead. Behind him, Clara moved silently, her determination palpable in the close darkness. After what seemed an eternity of slow progress, they reached another archway, this one sealed with a heavy wooden door. Stevens held the lantern close, examining the ancient lock. "Rusted through," he whispered. "But the hinges might still be sound." Tom studied the door, then placed his good shoulder against it, bracing his feet on the packed earth floor. "On 3, he murmured. 1, 2, 3. He pushed, gritting his teeth against the pain that lanced through his injured shoulder. For a moment, the door held firm. Then, with a groan of protesting metal, the hinges gave way. The door swung inward, releasing a cloud of dust and the musty scent of long-abandoned space. "Wait!" Tom cautioned, drawing his revolver. He listened intently, but heard nothing from beyond the doorway. Cautiously, he stepped through, finding himself in what had indeed once been a wine cellar. Empty racks lined the walls, and a wooden staircase led upward, presumably to the hotel's main floor. "We're in," he confirmed softly. "Stevens, you should return to the church now. What comes next is no place for a man of the cloth." The pastor hesitated. "Are you certain you don't need my assistance?" "We'll be fine," Tom assured him. "Besides, Cooper will need someone to help calm the townspeople once this is over." Stevens nodded reluctantly. "May God go with you both," he said, handing the lantern to Clara. "The stairs will take you to a storage room behind the hotel kitchen. From there, you'll have to find your own way." After Stevens had retreated down the passage, Tom turned to Clara. "Last chance to reconsider," he said gently. "No one would think less of you for staying clear of Whitmore." Clara's expression hardened. "I've spent 2 years living in fear of that man. I won't spend another day hiding from him." She checked the revolver Tom had given her, now tucked securely in the pocket of her dress. "I'm ready." Tom studied her for a moment, recognizing the quiet strength that had emerged from beneath layers of trauma and fear. "All right, but stay behind me, and if anything goes wrong, run," Clara finished. "I know." They ascended the stairs slowly, Tom testing each step to ensure it wouldn't creak and betray their presence. At the top, they found a solid door with a simple latch. Tom pressed his ear against it, listening for any sound from beyond. "Voices," he whispered. Distant, probably from the hotel lobby. He eased the door open a crack, revealing a dimly lit storage room stacked with hotel supplies, linens, cleaning materials, spare furniture. The room appeared unoccupied, and a second door on the far side presumably led to the hotel proper. Tom stepped into the room, motioning for Clara to follow. They moved silently through the cluttered space, reaching the far door without incident. Again, Tom listened before attempting to open it. This time the voices were clearer, angry, urgent exchanges punctuated by the occasional oath. Tom recognized Whitmore's cultured Virginia accent among them, issuing commands with the assurance of a man accustomed to unquestioning obedience. "We hold here," Whitmore was saying. "The Federals won't risk a direct assault with so many potential casualties." "They've given us till noon, Colonel," another voice responded. "That's less than 15 minutes from now." "Then we use those 15 minutes to strengthen our position," Whitmore snapped. "Garrison Jenkins, secure the rear entrance. Davis, maintain your position at the front windows. The rest of you gather whatever can be used as additional barricades." Tom glanced at Clara, who had grown pale at the sound of Whitmore's voice, but remained composed. He gestured for her to stay put, then carefully opened the door a few inches. Beyond lay a narrow service corridor that appeared to connect the kitchen to the main areas of the hotel. Tom could see movement at the far end, Whitmore's men carrying furniture to reinforce their barricades. None seemed aware of the storage room or its occupants. "6 men that I can see," Tom whispered. "Probably more that I can't. They're focused on the front of the building, expecting Cooper's assault." "Where's Earl?" Clara asked softly. "Can't tell, but he won't be far from his men." Tom considered their options. "We need to get closer, find out exactly where Whitmore is positioned before we make our move. And then we wait for Cooper's distraction." They slipped into the corridor, moving silently toward the main part of the hotel. Tom kept his revolver ready, painfully aware that they were outnumbered and that his wounded shoulder made him less effective than he would have liked. The corridor opened onto a larger space, the hotel's dining room now transformed into an impromptu fortress. Tables had been overturned to create barriers, and windows were blocked with mattresses and furniture. 8 men with rifles moved purposefully about the room, following Whitmore's directions. And there was Whitmore himself, standing near the grand staircase that led to the upper floors. Even in crisis, he maintained his aristocratic bearing, his silver-streaked beard neatly trimmed his clothing, immaculate despite the circumstances. He carried a shotgun in one hand, and what appeared to be a bottle of expensive bourbon in the other. Tom and Clara withdrew slightly, finding cover behind a large serving cabinet at the edge of the dining room. From this position, they could observe without being seen. "Earl's losing control," Clara whispered, noting the visible strain in Whitmore's expression and the nervous movements of his men. "I've seen him like this before, when things don't go according to his plans. He becomes erratic, dangerous." Tom nodded grimly. "Cornered predators usually do." He checked his pocket watch. 5 minutes until Cooper's deadline. We need to be ready to move when the distraction comes." Outside, the sun had reached its zenith, casting harsh light through the gaps in the barricaded windows. The atmosphere within the hotel was tense, charged with the nervous energy of men who knew they were trapped but refused to surrender. "What do you think Cooper will do?" Clara asked. "Something direct," Tom replied. "William was never one for subtlety. Probably a show of force at the front entrance demands for surrender through a bullhorn. Standard martial procedure for barricaded suspects." As if on cue, a commanding voice boomed from outside the hotel, amplified by what was indeed a bullhorn. "Ezekiel Whitmore, this is U.S. Marshal William Cooper. You and your men are surrounded by federal authorities. Surrender now, and you will be treated fairly under the law." Tom smiled slightly at the familiar cadence of Cooper's official voice. Some things never changed. Whitmore strode to a partially barricaded window, peering through a gap at the federal forces outside. "And if we choose not to surrender, Marshal," he called back. "Then we will be forced to take action," Cooper replied, his amplified voice implacable. You have 3 minutes to lay down your weapons and exit through the front door with your hands raised." Whitmore laughed, though there was an edge of desperation to it. "You're bluffing, Cooper. You won't risk a bloodbath in the middle of a civilian town. 2 minutes and 45 seconds. Whitmore turned from the window, his face flushed with anger. "Reinforcements will come," he assured his increasingly uneasy men. "Our allies in Redemption Creek." "Won't be coming," Tom said, stepping out from behind the cabinet. Every head in the room snapped toward him, weapons raising automatically. Tom kept his revolver pointed at Whitmore, ignoring the multiple rifles now trained on him. "Halbrook." Whitmore breathed genuine surprise, crossing his features before he mastered it. "How did you get in here?" "Same way I've been doing my job for 20 years, Tom replied evenly. "Patience and attention to detail." He took another step forward, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "Your men in Redemption Creek have been arrested, Whitmore. Wade Dawson is dead. The documents detailing your conspiracy are in federal hands. It's over." Uncertainty flickered across Whitmore's face, quickly replaced by calculation. One old lawman with a wounded shoulder against 10 armed men. Those aren't odds I'd take, Halbrook. "I'm not alone," Tom said. Clara stepped into view beside him, her own revolver steady in her hand. The sight of her caused a visible reaction among Whitmore's men, murmurs of surprise, exchanged glances, a subtle shifting of stances. "Hello, Earl," Clara said, her voice remarkably calm. Whitmore's expression darkened. "So, the wayward wife returns. Come to beg forgiveness, Clara." "I was never your wife," she replied steadily. "Just another piece of property you thought you owned." "Semantics," Whitmore dismissed with a wave of his hand. "You were mine by contract and payment. The law recognizes kidnapping and abuse for what they are." Tom interrupted. "Just like it recognizes conspiracy, bribery, and murder for hire." Outside, Cooper's voice resumed its countdown. 1 minute, Whitmore." Whitmore glanced nervously toward the window, then back at Tom and Clara. Tom could almost see the calculations running behind his eyes, weighing options, looking for leverage for escape. "My men are still loyal," Whitmore said, gesturing to the armed figures surrounding him. "Are you prepared to die here, Halbrook? To watch the girl die too?" "Are your men prepared to die for you?" Tom countered, "especially now that they know the truth about who and what you are." He addressed the armed men directly. "You're facing federal charges, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, assaulting federal officers. But right now, those are just charges. No shots fired, no marshals killed. You still have a chance to walk away from this." Several of Whitmore's men exchanged uncertain glances. One lowered his rifle slightly. "Don't listen to him," Whitmore snapped. "He's trying to divide us. The Redemption League protects its own. You'll be rewarded for your loyalty." "Like you rewarded Moses?" Clara asked quietly. "Or my father, or the young ranch hand Jacob, who was kind to me." Her words had a visible impact on the men, many of whom seemed to be hearing these names for the first time. "She's lying," Whitmore insisted, but his voice had lost some of its authority. "The girl is mentally unstable, prone to delusions." 30 seconds, Whitmore," Cooper's voice called from outside. Tom kept his eyes and his revolver trained on Whitmore. "Your empire is crumbling, Colonel. The only question now is how many more people get hurt before you accept that fact." Whitmore's composure finally cracked. "I built everything from nothing," he shouted, spittle flying from his lips. "After the war, took everything I came west with nothing but determination and vision. Built a ranch, gained influence, earned respect, and I will not let it be destroyed by a washed-up federal marshal and a hysterical girl." He swung his shotgun toward Clara, but Tom was already moving. Despite his wounded shoulder, he lunged forward, knocking the shotgun barrel upward just as Whitmore fired. The blast tore into the ceiling, sending splinters and plaster raining down. The room erupted into chaos. Some of Whitmore's men dove for cover. Others raised their weapons, uncertainly caught between loyalty to Whitmore and the desire for self-preservation. Tom grappled with Whitmore, forcing the shotgun from his hands. The older man was surprisingly strong, fueled by rage and desperation. They crashed into an overturned table, Whitmore's elbow driving into Tom's wounded shoulder. Pain exploded through Tom's body, momentarily blinding him. Whitmore seized the advantage, wresting free and reaching for a pistol at his belt. Before he could draw it, Clara's voice cut through the chaos. "Stop!" Both men turned to find Clara standing firm, her revolver pointed directly at Whitmore's chest. Her hands were steady, her eyes clear and determined. "It's over, Earl," she said. "Drop the gun." Whitmore stared at her, seeming to truly see her for the first time, not as property or as a victim, but as a human being with will and courage of her own. Something in his expression shifted, a mixture of disbelief and dawning comprehension. "You wouldn't dare," he said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "I already killed one man to protect Tom," Clara replied evenly. "I'll do it again if I must." From outside came the sounds of movement, heavy boots on the hotel's front porch, positions being taken. "Time's up, Whitmore," Cooper's voice announced. "We're coming in." The front doors burst open with a splintering crash. U.S. Marshals poured into the lobby, rifles raised, moving with the practiced efficiency of experienced lawmen. Whitmore's men immediately dropped their weapons, raising their hands in surrender. The fight had gone out of them at the sight of federal badges and overwhelming force, but Whitmore himself seemed beyond reason. With a roar of defiance, he drew his pistol and aimed at Clara. 3 shots rang out simultaneously, one from Clara's revolver, one from Tom's, and one from Marshal Cooper's rifle as he entered the dining room. Whitmore staggered backward, blood blooming across his immaculate white shirt. His pistol clattered to the floor, unfired. He looked down at the spreading crimson stain with an expression of almost comical surprise. "This isn't possible," he gasped, his aristocratic composure crumbling as his legs gave way. "I am Ezekiel Whitmore." "You're a criminal," Cooper said matter-of-factly, stepping forward to stand beside Tom and Clara. "And justice has finally caught up with you." Whitmore's gaze fixed on Clara, confusion and anger warring in his eyes. "You were nothing. How dare you?" "I was never nothing," Clara replied, lowering her revolver. "You just couldn't see me as human." Whitmore opened his mouth as if to respond, but only a bloody cough emerged. He slumped to the floor, his life ebbing away as federal marshals secured the room and took his men into custody. Tom placed a gentle hand on Clara's shoulder. "You all right?" She nodded, her expression a complex mixture of relief, sorrow, and lingering fear. "I think I will be. Eventually." Cooper approached, his weathered face solemn as he surveyed the scene. "Clean shooting, both of you, though I would have preferred to take him alive to stand trial." "Some men choose their own ending," Tom replied quietly. Cooper nodded in acknowledgement. "The documents Dr. Morgan brought us will still be enough to dismantle the Redemption League. Whitmore was just one part of a larger conspiracy." He holstered his rifle, turning to Clara. "Miss Wilson, your testimony will be crucial in the days ahead." "I'll tell everything I know," Clara assured him. whatever it takes to ensure this never happens again." Cooper's stern expression softened slightly. "You've shown remarkable courage, young lady, the kind we look for in those who uphold the law." Tom smiled at the subtle compliment. Coming from William Cooper, it was high praise indeed. As federal marshals led away Whitmore's surrendered men, and a doctor was summoned to pronounce Whitmore officially deceased, Tom found himself suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had sustained him began to ebb, leaving only pain and bone-deep weariness. Clara noticed immediately, supporting him as he swayed slightly. "You need rest," she said firmly, "and proper medical attention." "Later," Tom replied, though he leaned gratefully on her offered arm. "First, let's get out of this place." Together they walked out of the Elk Fork Hotel into the bright Montana sunlight. The town's residents had begun to emerge from their homes, gathering in small groups to watch as the standoff reached its conclusion. Among them stood Pastor Stevens and his wife Sheriff Whitby, and his remaining deputies, and Dr. Rebecca Morgan, who had returned with Cooper's marshals. As they descended the hotel steps, a spontaneous cheer arose from the townspeople. Tom felt oddly embarrassed by the display, but Clara straightened beside him, accepting the recognition with quiet dignity. "They're not just cheering for us," she observed softly. "They're celebrating their own liberation. From fear from Whitmore's influence." Tom nodded understanding. Throughout history, the end of tyranny, whether on a grand scale or a local one, always carried the same sense of collective relief, of possibilities renewed. Dr. Morgan approached her medical bag in hand. "You look terrible, Tom," she said bluntly. "Let's get you somewhere I can examine that shoulder properly." "Yes, ma'am," Tom replied with a tired smile. Some battles weren't worth fighting, especially against determined doctors. Cooper joined them as they moved toward Rebecca's office. "The federal prosecutor will want statements from both of you," he informed them. "But that can wait until tomorrow. For now, rest and recovery are the priority." "What happens next, William?" Tom asked. "With the Redemption League, I mean." Cooper's expression turned grim. "We've identified key members in 3 territories and 4 states. Arrest warrants are being prepared. It won't be easy, these men have money influence connections. But we've dealt their organization a significant blow today." "And the weapons," Clara mentioned, "the stockpile at Whitmore's estate. A detachment of marshals is already on its way to Redemption Creek to secure them," Cooper assured him, "along with any additional evidence we can find at the estate." Tom nodded, satisfied. "And Sheriff Collins, if he was involved in Whitmore's conspiracy, the evidence will show it," Cooper replied. "No one is above the law, Tom. You taught me that, remember?" Tom smiled faintly, remembering the young Deputy Cooper had once been eager and idealistic. "I remember." They had reached Rebecca's office. Before Tom went inside, Cooper placed a hand on his shoulder, the uninjured one. "For a retired lawman," he said with rare warmth, "you did good work here, Tom. The service misses men like you." "The service has men like you," Tom countered. "That's more than enough." Cooper nodded respectfully, then turned to Clara. "Miss Wilson, when you've recovered, I'd like to discuss your future plans. The Justice Department could use someone with your courage and first-hand knowledge of the Redemption League's operations." Clara's eyes widened in surprise. "Are you offering me a position, Marshal Cooper?" "Let's call it an opportunity," Cooper replied, "to turn your experience into something that helps others. Think about it." With that, he departed to oversee the processing of prisoners and the securing of evidence, leaving Tom and Clara to Dr. Morgan's capable hands. 2 weeks later, Tom sat on the porch of Pastor Stevens's home, watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in shades of gold and crimson. His shoulder was healing well, Though Rebecca had warned him it would likely trouble him in cold weather for the rest of his life. The door opened behind him, and Clara emerged carrying 2 cups of coffee. She had changed in the past weeks, standing straighter, speaking more confidently, the shadows in her eyes gradually receding. She had testified before a federal judge who had traveled to Elk Fork specifically to take depositions related to the Redemption League case. "Pastor Stevens says we can stay as long as we need to," she said, handing Tom one of the cups before taking a seat beside him. "Though I imagine you are eager to return to your ranch." Tom sipped his coffee thoughtfully. What's left of it? Wade Dawson and his men did quite a number on the place before they left. "We could rebuild it," Clara suggested. "Together. I'm good with my hands, and I learn quickly." Tom glanced at her, noting the tentative hope in her expression. Clara looked down at her coffee. "I've been thinking about Marshall Cooper's offer to work with the Justice Department against the Redemption League." She hesitated. "But I'm not ready for that yet. I need time to heal, to find myself beyond being Earl Whitmore's victim." "And you think rebuilding an old man's ranch is the way to do that?" Tom asked gently. "I think being somewhere safe with someone I trust, doing honest work with my hands, yes, that might be exactly what I need." She met his gaze directly. "Unless you'd rather be alone." Tom considered this. He had grown accustomed to solitude in the years since Sarah and Emma's deaths, finding a kind of peace in the quiet rhythms of ranch life. But Clara's presence these past weeks had awakened something he'd thought long dead, a sense of purpose, of connection to another human being. "I could use the help," he admitted. "Ranch work isn't easy with a bad shoulder." Clara's face brightened. "Then it's settled. We'll go as soon as Dr. Morgan says you're fit to travel." Tom nodded, watching as the last light faded from the western sky. "It won't be easy starting over at my age." "Nothing worthwhile ever is," Clara replied with the wisdom of someone who had endured more than her years would suggest. They sat in comfortable silence as stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring challenges rebuilding the ranch. Clara's continued testimony against the Redemption League, Tom's adjustment to a life no longer defined solely by solitude. But for now, in this moment of quiet reflection, Tom felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not the grand, sweeping kind that changed nations, but the smaller, more personal variety that changed individual lives. "Sarah would have liked you," he said suddenly, the words emerging before he'd fully formed the thought. Clara glanced at him, surprised by the mention of his late wife. "Would she?" Tom nodded. "She always believed in second chances, in building something good from what remains after loss." He smiled slightly. "She would have approved of you taking her revolver and putting it to good use." Clara returned his smile. "I'd like to hear more about her someday." "And Emma." "Someday," Tom agreed. Their memories were no longer too painful to share another unexpected gift from these tumultuous weeks. As night settled fully over Elk Fork, Tom reflected on the journey that had brought him here. From battle-scarred soldier to federal marshal, to grieving widower, to reluctant hero. Each chapter had shaped him for better or worse. And now it seemed a new chapter was beginning, one he would write alongside this remarkable young woman who had found the courage to reclaim her life from tyranny. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his coffee cup slightly. Clara touched her cup to his. "And to justice served." Tomorrow they would begin the journey back to what remained of Tom's ranch, carrying with them the scars of the past, but also the promise of healing. The Redemption League's influence would be dismantled. Justice would be pursued. and the nation would continue its long, imperfect progress toward the ideals upon which it was founded. But those were concerns for tomorrow. Tonight, under a canopy of Montana stars, an old lawman and a young survivor sat together in peaceful companionship, each having found in the other something long missing for Tom purpose, for Clara safety, and for both the profound human connection that makes life's hardships bearable. It wasn't the ending Tom had imagined for himself when he'd retired to his isolated ranch. It was perhaps something better, a continuation rather than an ending. A reminder that even in life's final chapters, new beginnings remained possible. And that Tom reflected as he gazed at the star-filled sky was a truth worth holding on to, the end.